wanted to come back in front of us. And I said, well, it's too late to come before us tonight. And Kevin said, well, I thought that everything was pretty clear they weren't interested.
Well, I'm not worried about it. I've stayed.
Being honest. Again, I love going there, you know.
Sorry to interrupt. It's 7 o'clock and we'll get started. We have a pretty good agenda tonight. If you will join me, we'll rise and do the Pledge of Allegiance. Our invocation tonight is by our own Joe Edwards. And Joe, I do have a special request of you, if you would, please.
What's that?
One of our own, Christine Brown, who heads our Westfield Youth Assistance Program, was traveling in, I believe it's France. She was in Europe this week, and a couple of days ago, she had a very serious heart attack. She is on life support there. Her husband and 2 sons are there, but we need her back, and so we'd like to offer her up in prayer from our entire city. Thank you. Please join me. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Let's bow our heads. Heavenly Father, we thank you for the opportunity to meet freely and discuss issues. And the citizens have a chance to vote, and we have a chance to vote on these issues. We ask that you watch over and bless the proceedings this evening. We also ask a special blessing for Christine Brown, who has suffered this illness, this heart attack in France, and that she be returned safely to us. We ask these things in Christ's name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you, Joe. Mr. Johns, would you like to lead this meeting?
Thank you, Mayor Cook. Marla Ayler, would you please note the presence of a quorum?
Joe Edwards,
Here.
Scott Willis,
Here.
Cindy Spoljaric,
Here.
Jake Gilbert,
Here.
Mike Johns,
Here.
Scott Fry,
Here.
Troy Patton.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Okay. First item is to announce changes to the agenda. And we actually have one addition to the agenda that came on board this late afternoon. It deals with a form that's needed to be used for the release of ARAP funds. So that will be our last item under new business. It's something that does require council approval. So moving on then to the approval of the minutes from our July 11th meeting. Councilors, do you have any questions regarding those minutes? Can I have a motion then regarding the minutes for the July 11th meeting?
Move to approve the July 11th meeting minutes.
Do you have a second?
Second.
Motion made by Councilor Gilbert, seconded by Councilor Edwards. Marla, would you call the roll, please?
Scott Willis,
Yes.
Cindy Spoljaric,
Yes.
Jake Gilbert,
Yes.
Mike Johns,
Yes.
Scott Fry,
Yes.
Troy Patton,
Yes.
Joe Edwards.
Yes.
Okay, the next item on the agenda is the approval of the claims docket for August 8th, 2022. Do I have any councilor questions regarding claims?
Mr. President, I would ask a question on page 29 there of the docket. There is a payment to the Westfield Investment Company. Who is the Westfield Investment Company? I know a lot of things around here. I've not heard of that one. It's on page 29, last page of the docket. Right there.
Yep. So, Public Works, Streets and Roads.
I couldn't remember the name of the LLC or the LP.
Yeah, that payment is related to a development agreement with Mr. Bo Wilfong and his development company there at Austrian Pine and Spring Mill Point Drive. The segment of roadway that they constructed as part of that development east of Meyer, the Spring Mill Point Drive portion, he is owed road impact fee credits for the construction of that roadway. This was an installment towards those credits. So as road impact fee is being generated from developments in his area, this particular one was in the amount of $102,338. I believe it was related to the Sonic, if I remember correctly. I could be wrong on that, but I can verify and send you an email. But the road impact fee was collected, and then subsequently he asked for reimbursement. The road has been approved as per our standards, and then this payment is just the release of those road impact fee credits to Mr. Wilfong.
Okay, that's sufficient.
Thank you, John.
Good.
Appreciate that. Councilors, any other questions regarding the claims docket? Do then I have a motion to approve the claims docket for August 8th, 2022?
So moved.
Do you have a second?
Second.
The motion made by Scott Willis, seconded by Joe Edwards. Marla, would you call the roll, please?
Cindy Spoljarek,
Yes.
Jake Gilbert,
Yes.
Mike Johns,
Yes.
Scott Fry,
Yes.
Troy Patton,
Yes.
Joe Edwards,
Yes.
Scott Willis.
Yes.
Okay. We have several presentations this evening. The first presentation, first of all, we'd like to welcome Mayor Scott Fadness from Fishers. And he's going to be talking to us about the Central Indiana Regional Development Authority and talk to us about how we can leverage the various cities in Hamilton County for grant money.
Yeah, this program was established by the legislature, 2 years ago? And it is a program that grants through competition regions of the state funds to improve their place, literally. In order to participate, we must join a regional authority. And Mayor Fadness has been working on this for many years, not only here in central Indiana, but throughout the state, and has been very key in the legislature finally pumping some funds back to regions in the state for improvements and the bottom line is to create a place where people, employees, and therefore employers want to be. So I've asked Mayor Fadness to give you the details on what's involved in us participating in this. It is not required that we join, but it is required that we be a member if we're going to share in the regional funds that this region may be awarded. Please.
Well, thank you, Mayor Cook, for that summary, and council members, I appreciate the opportunity to come over here tonight and speak to you. One of the things I cherish about Hamilton County is each community striving to create its own identity in its own way, and understand as we think about a framework for regionalism, in no way are we trying to impede on each individual community's ability to reach its true potential and make its own decisions on what it wants to be and who it wants to be as it grows and develops. And so as we created the framework for this, this Regional Development Authority under Indiana statute, first and foremost, we actually went down to the State House and specifically got legislation authored for Central Indiana to focus on the issues that we have. So there are other regional development authorities across the state of Indiana. Ours is distinctly different. And part of what makes ours different is it limits the authority of that regional entity to really just focus on coming together, speaking with one voice on issues that matter to us collectively, and I'll speak to a couple of those here in a moment. And then also, to be frank with you right now, there's a significant amount of funding available out there at the federal and state level, and a lot of those funding pots are focused on regional solutions to things. They want to see collaboration and people working together collectively. And in central Indiana, we never really had an entity to go do that. We had goodwill among many of the the leaders in central Indiana, but we never had an entity recognized under Indiana law that would say we are an entity that can receive funds and then distribute them to our counterparts. So Mayor Cook is exactly right. When this last round of funding came available from the state of Indiana, we came together as a group and applied, and we were able to receive $20 million from the IEDC. That $20 million has to be distributed through an entity. So we set up the Central Indiana Regional Development Authority. Very shortly, that $20 million will be deposited into the funds of the Central Indiana Redevelopment Authority, but then it will go directly back out to all of the communities per the grants that they received. And so it's not as though we're creating another layer of government or anything to that extent. We really are just trying to create an entity to go pursue these opportunities that exist. We had our first kickoff meeting, and just so you're aware, the current communities involved that are active members: Fishers, Carmel, Noblesville, McCordsville, Speedway, Lawrence, Indianapolis, Zionsville are all members currently, and Greenwood is under consideration for joining as well. They had to join a little later because you have to be contiguous. You have to be adjacent to a community that's in the redevelopment authority. Indianapolis had to vote first in order for Greenwood to be able to come and be a part of it, and Beech Grove is also a member of the redevelopment authority. Our upcoming meeting, just to give you an idea of the things that we're talking about, we have a presentation from Dan Parker at the Department of Public Works in Indianapolis on a study that they did through HNTB that shows the current road funding formula at the state of Indiana, unfortunately, shortchanges populated areas from the true amount of road funding that they need. So places that are growing like Westfield, Fishers, Noblesville, Carmel, Indianapolis, if you look at the per capita funding that we're getting to provide the road services that everyone needs, it's significantly lower than, say, rural counties in the state of Indiana. And so is there an opportunity to work with our state legislature and partner to try to adjust that formula that would then allow for more sustainable funding to come back to municipalities like a Westfield that's growing quickly to be able to meet the needs of a growing population? That's one agenda item for the upcoming meeting. Another agenda item is Purdue University is working on pursuing a grant, a $160 million grant. It's a multi-year grant to try to bring more life science companies to central Indiana. You guys were very successful in landing Abbott, and companies like that is what we're trying to continue to pursue. And so Purdue would like to show that they have a partner in central Indiana to work collectively towards pursuing that grant. That's another example of us being able to pursue funding options that are outside the bounds of perhaps an individual municipality. What this RDA doesn't do is it does not grant the RDA the authority to go tax, doesn't grant the authority to go raise revenue on its own. That is still exclusively the purview of the fiscal bodies of each and every community. So I want to be clear that there isn't an opportunity here that we create this governmental entity and then it goes out and starts taxing your residents without your control. It's still the legislative body that would make that decision for each particular community. The representation on the RDA are the chief executive officials of each community. So in a city, it would be the mayor. In a town, it would be the town council president or their designee is the current makeup of the RDA. I'm happy to entertain any questions that you have. I really wanted to just introduce the concept to all of you tonight. Have information that I can share with all of you for your review so you can have a thorough analysis of the ordinances. The way it's adopted is each fiscal body of each community would have to adopt a similar ordinance. So every one of the communities that I mentioned earlier have all passed the same ordinance. And we have that recorded, and it's recorded with the IEDC. And then you're officially in the RDA and can participate actively moving forward. So tonight I really wanted to introduce the idea to all of you. I wanted to answer any questions that you might have at a high level, share some additional information. I know as a body you need to be deliberative and review any of the legal documents and things of that nature, but really tonight, upon the request of Mayor Cook, I was happy to come over and share a little bit of the work that's ongoing with our RDA. With that, I'd entertain any questions that any of you may have.
Mayor, for this round that you just
Yep.
referenced, which I believe you said was like 20 million.
Yeah.
Could you give us some examples of what that money is going to go towards? You said per community based on what their grants
Yes.
were awarded.
So some examples of grant funding that did come out of that. We received $4.5 million to build a park along the White River in Fishers. Indianapolis received funding for a park in downtown Indianapolis along the White River. The concept of the grant application was the White River corridor, so that's why you see a bit of a consistent theme here. Noblesville applied, but unfortunately, one of the things that happened with the READY funds is they swapped out the state general funds with AARP funds, so they became more restrictive. So some of those projects actually got eliminated, but I can tell you, Anderson received funds, McCordsville received funds, Zionsville received funds, Fishers received funds, Carmel received funds, and Indianapolis received funds. A lot of those in this particular case were based on quality of life projects. If you wanted to invest in a park, if you wanted to invest in a pedestrian bridge, those are examples of the type of investment in infrastructure that the grant was for. And I think if you look at the spirit of the next level grant or the governor's initiatives on this, it really is about trying to provide kind of once in a lifetime funding to communities to go invest in an amenity that will make their community more livable and more attractive for talent moving forward. But that's just one grant. There's plenty of other opportunities, and my understanding as well, I will tell you, in talking to Secretary Chambers, I don't think you mind me telling you this, our Secretary of Commerce, if they anticipate another round of these grants coming out of the state, their intent would be that Central Indiana would come together and apply as one group for funds for Central Indiana moving forward. So we want to be prepared for that and be as competitive as possible. Frankly, we don't want to continue to get beat out. Evansville region got $50 million. Fort Wayne got $50 million. Our group got $20 million. And so we want to, sharpen our pencils, get better at this, get more effective, speak with one collective voice, and hopefully draw more revenue back to Central Indiana.
Mayor Faddis, I got a quick question.
Yep.
Do you guys try to pursue projects that all of your members benefit from? I mean, is there a chance that Westfield joins, adds leverage to the RDA, and then we're not seeing any funds coming back from that?
Well, I think anytime you talk about regionalism, there will be opportunities where one community benefits more than the other just by the nature of the project. But our intent here is to raise the collective. So there may be an opportunity that makes a lot of sense for Westfield and in the Zionsville and Carmel area that really isn't going to have a tremendous impact on Fishers. But we know if I support that project this time, the next time a project comes up that makes a lot of sense for Fishers and Lawrence, that there's an opportunity to support that. So I think, Scott, to your point, I think these really are searching for those multi-jurisdictional projects that cross over boundaries and that can really be transformational for a particular corridor.
Excellent, thank you, appreciate it.
Yes, sir.
If I can just ask you, and I may have misunderstood what you were saying. You said something about a taxing authority. So what additional taxes would there be?
I said that only to point out that it has no taxing authority.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Okay.
no,
Okay.
it has no ability to tax. That still remains with all of you.
Yeah, right. Okay. Thank you.
If we, go ahead, Joe.
Yes, sir.
You've helped us kind of on some distribution of state funds through this area, and although we can say it, there is always competition for these communities, be it Westfield or Carmel or Fishers or Noblesville, to, I don't want to say feather their own nest, that's not right, but to get as much money as they can for what they need. And I would hope that we would not have a lot of competition in here for various kinds of grants where it would just make sense to not have a lot of competition, that the grants be pretty well laid out prior to receiving them.
Yeah, so a couple of things to that point, sir, and I think it's a good question. The grants that so this RDA doesn't get to decide which community gets what money. What we're doing is we're coming together as a group and we're applying to We're applying to the state, we're applying to the federal government to try to get money back to our region. Our competition in this particular situation is not Fishers competing with Westfield. It's Central Indiana competing against Southern Indiana, competing against Columbus, Ohio, competing against, Austin, Texas. That's the type of competition we're talking about for federal funds and state funds. That's, to me, we should be working together, not competing with one another when it comes to this, because we have to compete against the rest of the country.
I'd like to thank you for what you've done.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate that.
What is the cost to participate?
There's nothing at the moment. There's no cost associated with it.
You say at the moment. So what is actually planned or possible for that?
Down the road, could there be like an administrative person, a staff person to manage things? That's a possibility. But as of right now, there's no fee to be a part of the RDA.
Okay, and do counties participate in this, or is it just locals?
Counties would have the opportunity to participate, yes, ma'am.
Has Hamilton County been asked to participate?
Not yet, no.
Not
We're
yet.
making
Is
our
there a
rounds, though.
reason?
No, not at all. Just haven't gotten around to everybody yet.
Okay. So then who kind of manages the participation and writes the grants and, or not the grants, but the, proposals that they have for these things?
So if you want to use the example of the READY grant that we just received, the 20 million, it was a group of staff from various communities that volunteered their time to be able to put that grant together for the collective. So there were staff members from multiple communities involved in the drafting of that grant.
Do you
to
know if
submit to
they
the
have
state.
specific grant writers on staff, or?
Those people themselves were not grant writers. They were economic development folks and planning staff and things of that nature. And it speaks a little bit, frankly, to the lack of infrastructure that we have for this. So, if you look at the Southwest or Northeast or Northwest regions of Indiana, they all have teams of people that are working on these things all the time. And their main job is to focus on these things. We don't have that. So when we went to go do the READY grant, we literally figured out who had extra staff that could volunteer time to try to draft the proposals to try to compete. And I think, frankly, our proposal reflected that to some degree, and maybe perhaps why we received 20 million and others received 50 million. So we really want to build up our capacity and capability to respond to these types of opportunities in the future.
Okay. Would you say that a lot of the potential projects are kind of going to be in the Indianapolis general vicinity?
Based on the READY grant, I think, I'm trying to remember off the top of my head, I think Hamilton County received as much, if not slightly more than Marion County received out of that $20 million.
Okay.
So-
That was for the White River project,
Yes,
right? Yeah.
yes, yep, but if you include Anderson, Noblesville, Carmel, Fishers, we received at least 45 to 50, maybe even more % of the funding that came available.
Okay.
And it's important to note that the RDA, because we wanted to make it truly regional, Indianapolis had a lot of reservations about that because they thought they were going to get ganged up on by everybody else, but we talked through all that, and ultimately, Indianapolis has only 2 votes in the entire RDA, one for the city, and then the fact that it's a consolidated, so one for Marion County, one for the city, and that's the only 2 votes that they have. So Hamilton County has more votes, if you want to look at it that way, than Marion County, or I should say Indianapolis and Marion County has.
So is it not based on population, it's just every jurisdiction gets 1 vote?
Everyone gets 1 vote. And that was something that was important from my perspective, that if we're going to be truly regional, and I think to Councilman Willis's point a minute ago, if you want to think collectively and regionally, you can't really go on a weighted population. You really need one community, 1 vote.
Okay, thank you.
And I will say one other thing. You have to have a population of 8,500 to be able to be a voting member. Because there was a concern that if you look at all of the small towns in central Indiana, you could have a board that looks like the United Nations. You could have 250 people, and you know how hard it is with 7. So we did limit it to 8,500 or more population.
One little bit, though, to add, Todd Clevenger with the county is a grant
grant writer guy.
Oh.
And I think it'd be very helpful if you did get them on there, if nothing else.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. Well, look, we're looking to leverage every resource we have.
Another follow-up question, if I can. The future expenses that certainly seem like they will be incurred, is there a roadmap in place to determine how those expenses will be shared? And then second part of that would be when there are funds awarded, is there a roadmap in place to determine how those are shared as well?
So if there are funds awarded, they are prescriptive by the people who are awarding the funds. So like the IDC, when we received the $20 million, they told us, here's where all the money has to go. So the RDA board doesn't get to decide, well, Westfield will get $3 million of that, Fishers will get $2 million. That's the state of Indiana saying, we approve your proposal, we're gonna give you $20 million, and you have to spend it exactly the way the proposal was written. So where you would have ability or feedback is in the proposal itself that you send in. As for the funding, we have a couple different models we can try to approach. So for instance, most of these grants come with some sort of administrative fee associated with it for facilitating it. Our hope is that in the early days, we can fund the structure of this just off the administrative fees that come with grants that you're able to receive. But anything beyond that, we'd have to come back to all of you for consideration. You know, we would have to come back to this board and say, hey, we'd like to propose a fee for this, for administration purposes. So each municipality still controls their own fiscal destiny moving forward.
Scott, does this take into account all federal grants, all grant money? Does it preclude the city from going after an individual grant?
That's a great question. No, not at all. In fact, the only applications we would be making through this Regional Development Authority would be for grants that specifically ask for regional proposals. So, you know, like for instance, the one that Purdue is currently working on, they require that it be a regional approach. But if you went after a federal grant for whatever your community needs, that's entirely separate, and we wouldn't want to interfere in that in any way.
Sounds good. Councilors?
Well, I very much appreciate the opportunity to have spoken with all of you. I'll follow up with all this information and share with the council for your review. And if it's something that you're interested in considering, we would love to have Westfield as a valuable member of our Regional Development Authority. So thank you all for your time tonight.
Thank you very much. Okay, our next item on the agenda tonight is a discussion regarding the DWA leases, and it's going to be kind of started by Marla Ayler. Open the floor then for questions.
Is it okay to stay up here, or do you want me to go down there?
Yeah, I think it's fine to stay up here.
All right. So the SBOA Accounting and Uniform Compliance Guide requires that we keep not only a list of capital assets, but that we also adhere to our capital assets policy. While the city adopted a resolution in 2017, it was 17144, or I'm sorry, 114, on fiscal policies, it did expire 2 years later on January 1st, 2019. This morning, I requested a copy of the current capital assets policy from John Rogers. It is important to address capitalizing assets in governmental accounting because most are typically categorized as depreciable assets rather than expenses. They include land, which isn't depreciable, buildings, improvements, construction work in progress, vehicles, machinery, equipment, historical treasures, infrastructure assets, and intangible assets. The Clerk Treasurer's Office records these assets at their historic cost for any item over $5,000 using a fixed asset notification form. However, if a department head or administrative staffer fails to complete the form with detail or notify the Clerk Treasurer's Office of an asset, it may go unnoticed, as may have been the case for city-owned assets located at 201 Mill Street, 220 Penn Street, Camilla Court, and at least one specific address in Grand Park where non-municipal commercial business takes place. Relative to the Downtown Westfield Association, or DWA, Councilor Spoljaric and I were invited to and attended an extensive meeting with Mr. Hersig, Mr. Lawler, and Mr. Rogers on June 28th. A new draft agreement was distributed. While this would update the 2016 agreement with DWA regarding property management, it may do nothing to address the 2010 service agreement between the city and DWA. Furthermore, as Mr. Lawler pointed out in an email, nothing in the agreement required DWA to share the records with the city, and subsequently, the clerk treasurer's office is not responsible to maintain those records, which perpetuates an existing and common problem in our office. If we don't receive contracts, agreements, insurance certificates, appraisals, bids, or proposals, we are unlikely to be able to provide a full picture of the city's important financial matters. As I explained last week at the Finance Committee meeting, Mr. Latour, Executive Director of DWA, was kind enough to share the lease agreement, certificates of insurance, and the rents collected from his tenants. It may be because there was no listing on the fixed asset sheet, or it might be because of the nature of the agreements. Regardless, these rental revenues skip over our office. It has been only recently that we have discovered inconsistencies with real property taxes billed by the county, and we feel that it might necessitate a sincere and immediate need for the 12-year-old agreement to be updated, as our office was, once again, invoiced and paid $7,500 to DWA for this year's second quarter pursuant to the 2010 agreement, which appeared on your claims docket tonight. This upcoming November will mark 1 year from the clerk treasurer's last request for the agreement to be updated, about which the SBOA has commented on in 3 consecutive audits. Mr. Latour and I met this past Thursday, where he shared his background in property management. He had not yet received the new draft agreement and knew nothing of its contents, but has since requested and received it over the weekend. Based on our conversation, I learned that DWA does have their own general counsel at Church, Hiddle, and Antrim, and Mr. Latour has many great ideas about how a different property management agreement might best serve the city. The clerk treasurer's office used to be the department who reported notice of exempt or non-exempt municipally owned property to the Hamilton County Assessor's Office, and was the point of contact when it came to tax-related matters. And the clerk treasurer would like that responsibility returned to her office to ensure timely payments and accurate reporting. We are also asking for council's help fulfilling last year's corrective action plans before the end of the year, but specifically tonight, those relative to DWA. If I can answer any questions for you, I would be happy to do that.
Well, I know that there was a pretty robust discussion at the Finance Committee regarding this. I guess I'm a little concerned with my background in real estate and property management. Most property management companies function at about a 10% rate, 10 to 15% maximum. The ones I'm familiar with function at 10%. And for that 10%, they collect the rent and manage the leases, and if there's any problems with the HVAC or a roof leak, they contact the laborers, the contractors, get those repairs started, taken care of. So it's curious to me, and I guess I don't understand why we as a city would take any of our assets and turn them over to another entity and say, go and do with them what you like. If we're renting our assets out or generating income from those assets, that is income that belongs to the taxpayers of Westfield. And it seems to me that we should be incumbent on managing those revenues properly. So, Councilor?
I'll just give a little bit of background from what I know from years ago. When DWA was formed and getting up and going, the city wanted to see that group really thrive. And so they did participate in various different ways to try and help get that group up and going. And in turn, DWA provided services to the city, including things like the farmer's market and party on the patio and all those things. And I think it was at least justified years ago that they would keep that revenue to help them further the cause for enhancing the downtown. But they were supposed to move to a membership model that a paid membership model, I guess you'd say. I don't know that that ever occurred. There was also things that I think the city expected was going to be services provided, but the DWA, it kind of didn't move that way. And a lot of that was the city too, and that we didn't have the same expectations, if you will. And you add to it that we've had well, at least I know that the Camilla Court property has been quite successful in its operations. We did have the issue now with the Heart and Soul building, and that was one of the complexities, just to be very public about that. It used to be a nonprofit use in there, and I think that's where the tax situation wound up with it not being actually assessed at a commercial rate because it was being used by a nonprofit before. So I just want to let people know, I think that that's what happened with that one. I want to applaud the DWA. They have been providing a lot of services for what we get. But you're right, that agreement, and I don't think most of us even understood all that was going in to that, and it had just been renewed and renewed automatically. It obviously does need to be revised. So, and again, we're working on all those details, but we do need to figure out how much is appropriate in terms of a management agreement, and perhaps separate out, at least in my opinion, services that they provide the city for things like the farmer's market, as opposed to combining it with the property management aspect. I don't know if that makes sense, but.
It makes sense to me.
Okay.
I mean, when I look back and see, I'm looking at an agreement that was put together 12 years ago. We were a town, and towns aren't cities, and towns have different policies and procedures and practices. And I think perhaps, and this seems to me like something that a town does where it's kind of bartering, if you will. And that's what I think we were doing. We're bartering. We're saying, hey, if you can take care of our farmers market and give us some ideas for downtown, and maybe have a few parties downtown, in return, we'll let you manage our city properties. That may be okay for a town, but I don't think that's where we're at today. I mean, we're third-class city. We're talking about becoming a second-class city, and part of that is looking at policies and procedures. I've got a rental house, and if I couldn't manage it myself, I've got a Century 21 Sheets Property Management Group that could manage it for me for 10%. I'm a little bit conservative, and I'm not willing to give up that 10%. But I would treat the city and see the city and the taxpayers' revenues, I would treat them no differently than I would treat my own. If we, in fact, need someone to run the farmer's market, then we should do that and pay a fair competitive price to do that. It's my opinion. I think the days of bartering are gone. Just my thoughts.
Well, we seem to be double dipping a bit. I mean, kind of what Cindy's saying. I mean, if we have, it's got to be one or the other. Either they keep the money from the leasing and then we quit funding them from the city standpoint, or vice versa. Because we are paying them. Right now, I mean, we're just letting people double dip us. That's kind of what you're saying, right, Cindy?
Yeah, and those agreements, honestly, it happened certainly before my time and outside of my purview. I'm just telling you what I know about back in that time, what occurred.
Where are we at on the agreement?
Well, perhaps Mr. Hersig would be better to answer that.
Happy to, yeah. But during that meeting, I provided draft template forms to update the lease agreement. And the purpose of that meeting, which lasted, I don't know, Jeremy, a couple hours, was to get a history lesson, first of all, which was appreciated, about what had happened and what had transpired before, and then to get a baseline about what the council would like to see, both from a management standpoint and in the lease agreement itself. And the goal, I thought, was to get comments on those written agreements, and that we would then incorporate and then present to you for further discussion. That latter step never happened. So, and the fact that, and Ms. Ayler, I know you're new, but the fact that it was sent over to Mr. Latour without that process being finalized is not okay, because those were draft form, those were attorney-client communications with Councilman Spoljarek for the purpose of then finalizing an agreement to get approved by you, then to be sent to Mr. Latour to negotiate. So that's generally where we are with the agreement. I don't think anybody disagrees, and Jeremy can speak to this better than I can about the need to update some of these issues. But the process has unfolded to do just that.
It's actually been difficult to kind of unravel, actually, like what is actually occurring on both ends with services and the buildings, you know, the properties. And so just unraveling this and how we can move forward with both of those things has been kind of a complicating matter. And we added in the potential for Mill Street. And that's a question out here that we need to figure out as a council, how we're going to proceed with that if we want that included in an agreement.
Sure, I guess part of my recommendation then is to, what do you want to see happen? And focus on that, because amending the agreements to focus on what you want to see moving forward is the key. If you want to see reporting, if you want to see documents flowing from DWA to the city, if you want to see whatever, put it in the agreement, get the agreements amended as soon as possible, and move on instead of kind of rehashing things that had happened, I don't know, 12 years ago or so. I don't think we're going to be able to unwind it just because of that reason, right? It was 12 years ago.
Yeah, I don't care what happened 12 years ago.
That's
I
my
mean,
recommendation.
I would agree with you on that.
So we're there on the same point. I would say focus on what you want to see from an operational standpoint and from the leases itself. And obviously, I have tremendous recommendations about that, about as far as insurance and reporting and out clauses and all sorts of things that I would have liked to have seen fleshed out before it was sent over. And then let's move forward on it. That's what I recommend.
Yeah.
Just to be clear, because I am new, but I heard you very loud and clear, I did not send the document to Mr.
Well, I thought you
Latour.
said you sent it.
He requested it from Mr. Lawler on Friday and received it from him.
Okay.
So, yes, I did not share that. I understood that to be
Got it. Thank you.
proprietary and not signed. Just for council's clarity, so while a 12-year-old agreement may or may not be important to you today, it is the reason, according to the response in the SBOA reports, that we are giving $7,500 a quarter to DWA, because that 12-year-old agreement apparently is going month to month in perpetuity until you do something different.
So ultimately, that 2010 agreement needs to either be updated or replaced or withdrawn, I guess.
I believe in the contract it says you can notify them in writing that you would like it to terminate, but better question maybe to have your attorney look at it, because I don't know much about that. I just know why we're still paying it. And so we do receive an invoice quarterly. We have since last year, I believe, and so that's why we're still paying it. When we get an invoice, we pay our bills.
Sure.
So.
It seems to me we almost have three different issues. We've got one issue, the city's property that needs to have a property manager to manage. We've got a second issue, which is the DWA. Do they have the same value to the city? Do they have the same needs that they did 12 years ago? And then the third issue, what other functions do the DWA perform, and how should they be compensated for those? So I think those three are intermingled, but I think you almost have to separate them out and address each one on an individual basis to bring any clarity to this. If that makes sense.
I hate to, as one of the 7 superheroes up here, it's a reference to Amazon Prime movie. Anyways, it seems really easy. I mean, we update it. Hey, if he wants to do the 10 or 15%, he keeps it. If not, we move on. When we move it out and be done. Same thing, if people think the DWA should be getting money, that's fine. And by the way, this is not against Steve Latour, because I do think Steve does a good job on a lot of these things. But at the same time, end it. We have a Westfield Welcome group that's actually part of our city. It's supposed to be kind of doing the same type of thing, putting on events and things like that. It doesn't seem really difficult to me. I don't know why we just don't fix it and say, hey, Steve, do you want to take the 10 or 15%? If not, okay, no problem. We'll move it on to someone else. We'll take back that control. And again, I'm just one of the 7, but I mean, I don't know, maybe it's just common sense.
I agree. I would think that hopefully this is something we could resolve within the next 30 days. Is that reasonable, Manny, do you think?
I'd be disappointed if it wasn't done in 30 days. I mean, this is just not that hard. I mean, we're not even talking about that much stuff. I mean,
Right, I agree with you. We just need to know what direction you want to go, and we can present. The agreement part is easy once you figure out what you want to do.
Can you share the current agreement with all of us?
Yeah, I'd be happy to send it to you. And I would like to also add, I see Steve in the back row, and what I would tell you is he has some great ideas, but it was really the city presenting to him based on an idea of how you might want it, and maybe it makes more sense if he presented to you, given his background in property management. But that's on you guys. But are you wanting all 3 agreements? Because I need Mr. Hersig's permission to send that to you, or Ms. Jarrett could send it to you, I suppose, as a council member.
I'd like to make a suggestion that the Finance Committee, since it is 3 counselors who can sit down together, take over this issue and have a meeting with Mr. Latour, with our attorneys, and just kind of dig through it, investigate it. Again, I think it's something that can be done pretty quickly, but rather than try to do it as city council at a public meeting, I think we'd be better off handling it, at least working on the basics as a committee, on a committee basis, and then coming back to the city council with recommendations.
Mr. President, the only issue with that is that we're going to have to do that in public. If we sit down, we're going to have to notice that meeting and, again, extend the process. So perhaps we can have somebody just grab the bull by the horns and make it happen and come back with a recommendation.
I was actually, Scott, my guy, you had me at hello, all right? So, I mean, why don't we just throw out, 3 things for the next city council, and every city council member can come up with something. We'll just kind of vote them up and down, boom, move on, and have it done. I mean, at the next city council meeting. I mean, I'm not saying I don't want to be a part of it. I'm just saying I'd just rather see the 7. I know, and people say, oh gosh, you guys like a circus. You guys are up here talking. This is how it's supposed to be done. I mean, you work through it and figure it out where all 7 of us have a say, as opposed to, no offense, Joe and Scott and I coming up with something, and we put 3 ideas in front of you, but it's still our group think in that there's 3 people, and I'd rather just be the 7 of us and say, hey, look, this is what we have. Jake may say, hey, I want this or that, and we incorporate it and be done.
I do think we need to determine what exact properties we're talking about in this agreement, because that's something I think that, at least I can't get my head around, because is it just the 2 properties? Does it include the Mill Street? Does it include this Grand Park property? Obviously, I wouldn't think that the DWA would be doing anything up at the Grand Park property, and I think that's not probably in the purview of this. But the Mill Street, that was never part of any agreement for that previously, and there was talk of using that as a city office. And, we haven't figured that issue out yet, if that's what we so choose to do, because that is redevelopment property, and that's probably a discussion for a different day. But the problem is we have the 2 properties we know of, and then are we going to add the Mill Street property to this discussion? So.
Yep.
And I don't have the answer to that.
I had asked, because someone from the private sector asked me about the Mill Street property. Hey, is that, the city's gonna rent that out, and so I asked, and it just seemed like there's some uncertainty and lack of clarity on what the city wants to do. That's not me attacking the city's plans in any way, shape, or form. But I think for this particular issue, if we had permission to see the agreements, we could at least know what to ask for to manage request. I just think before I request anything, I need to read
You
the
guys,
agreements.
you guys don't need permission to see. You guys,
So if I had permission to read it, and so forth and so on, and then maybe in addition to that, if the Mill Street property is not in the agreements, and I'm assuming it's not gonna be a part of any agreement going further, but maybe that needs to be added by request from the city if we do want Mill Street to be included, because I'm assuming right now it's not in the agreements we would read about. That's an assumption, but maybe Jeremy would tell me otherwise.
So Mill Street, we had an email interaction. The city, if that's what you're calling us, we would like to keep the building, improve it, turn it into a functional space for support of Grand Junction, at least for a short period of time until other things develop and we have additional parking and stuff like that to accommodate it being a restaurant or something else someday. So that's what we would like to do. It's your decision. You all own it. If you want to incorporate it in this as a part of a lease, that's okay too. I think we're indifferent. The other part of the conversation is we have had some struggles leasing the cafe due to our regulatory processes. If we're going to consider adding properties that they're going to manage potentially, then we could consider that as well. They have a little more freedom to lease than we do. So I think we should consider both of those things. As we're talking about this holistically, and Steve I won't talk for what DWA does to support downtown in the city in general. We're talking about $30,000 a year in annual revenue that they receive from the two properties, and then potentially more or less, depending on how you decide to do that. And then annually, the city also contributes $30,000 on a quarterly basis, as Marla was describing, to the overall operations. I can tell you from my experience, they invest way more than that back into the downtown in the form of events and engagements, and they just bought $50,000 worth of Christmas lights for Westfield and Lights and gave them to the city. And there's a laundry list of other things that they're doing. So I think we would be remiss to not allow Steve, when he's ready, I suppose, if he's not ready today, explain to you all what DWA does for downtown before we make a decision on profit share, cancellation, moving forward. I think we just need to look at the picture holistically. And then those are my only comments.
Thank you, Jeremy. I don't know, counselors, it seems to me that we should entertain, first of all, we need to get the property management issue resolved and figure out, one, how many properties we actually have that we want to lease out, rent out, and manage, and two, figure out if we have to put out an RFP to find out who can manage those. And then secondly, and a separate item would be to consider DWA and to learn more about what they do for the city, all the projects that they're involved with, and move on from there. But they are two separate issues.
I do actually have one question. It's from Manny. So if we go the route of an RFP to have a for-profit likely company manage the properties on our behalf, are they bound by the same leasing requirements that we are? So public RFP, appraised value for leasing per square foot, and all of those things.
Yeah, so you're basically talking about two different things. One is the service provided for management of properties. Advisable to get an RFP, don't have to have one. But then that company is limited in what it can do. It can only manage the existing properties. It's not going to be able to sublease for you. It's not going to be able to lease property for you. It can run the process, but you would still be subject to the Indiana Code requirement for two appraisals and an RFP process for the leasing of those properties. Engaging DWA or a like nonprofit entity would alleviate the city of that concern and make it a little bit more flexible in what it can do, because it can lease to a nonprofit, and then in the eventual agreement, you would have to spell out, which we have included, again, as a baseline recommendation, to have subletting and assignment rights that would then be subject to certain restrictions and requirements that the city puts on, that would just be passed through to the sublessee without DWA having to undergo the RFP process like the city would. Does that make sense?
I think I'm more confused now, but thank you.
Do
That
we
was the
have to
goal.
do an RFP, Manny? We don't have to do an RFP, correct?
To just get a property manager, because it's a service, no.
Right.
To have somebody in place or an entity in place like DWA does now, where they're subleasing property and providing management services, if it's a nonprofit, no. If it's a for-profit, if you're gonna lease space, absolutely you do. And you have to pay for appraisals, and you have to go through that whole rigmarole, which is why I think Jeremy and the team are having a tough time with the cafe.
Well, technically, I mean, one of the people leasing our properties now is, they're for-profit.
Right, so the structure is this. Your leasing rights that you are giving to DWA, as they can sublease to for-profit entities without having to undergo the same hoops.
So as soon as we make them a property manager, then we have to do a different route.
No, because they're right now, and as the proposal is structured, they're doing both services. They
Okay.
have the ability to manage the property and also to sublease the property.
Yeah,
If you were just to engage a property manager, they would not have the ability to sublease the property to a for-profit.
okay, got it.
Okay.
I still don't think this is that hard. I think it's actually,
I don't think it is either. All right.
Well, one of us is gonna have to take a bull by the horns, get this done. And, I mean, I don't think it's a hard task, but it seems like everybody's got a little different arrangement on things, and we need to be aware of what that is. I think we're becoming aware of what it is. But somebody's gonna have to do it. I would be a poor person to do it. I'd be like a bull in the china shop, line them up, do it. But I think with the advice of the attorney, we would keep the bulls, knock the bull's horns off a little, and there's a right way and a wrong way to do it. And there's, we're growing, and we just need to convey some income to the Downtown Westfield Association somehow, but it's gotta have a proper form and by agreement. That's the way I see it.
Didn't we start down that pathway? Didn't you meet with Ms. Spoljaric and
Yeah, and then all
Steve
these questions
and
came up.
Jeremy?
And that's where we're
I
at.
thought that's where we were going,
Right,
exactly.
but again, all these questions have now come up. So it's not just and I'm one person, I don't speak for seven, and again, I'm confused by all of this, and I have not sat down with Steve.
So
to
how
hash
would you
this
like
out.
to proceed? You want us to sit down with, well, do you want to have a special session and all of us get together and discuss this? Or do you want a
I think,
committee to do it and
I think we should
come
have
back to you with a
one-
recommendation?
one point person to meet with the city.
One?
and one point person. Can we agree on that?
Yeah, it's not gonna be me.
Can I have?
No.
I got
Well,
enough stuff.
Joe's out, Cindy's out.
Does,
Not me.
Scott,
does anyone have the time? Do you have the ti- Who's got the bandwidth to do it right now?
I'll do it.
You-
Yep.
Okay.
good, thank you.
Okay, Troy will be our point person, and let's move down the path of looking at the contracts and making a decision to come back to the council with recommendations with respect to property management companies.
I'll send you an email tomorrow, Troy, with background,
All right.
just so you're caught up.
Okay.
Thank you. All right. Okay, moving on to our next discussion, midterm budget review. Jeremy?
Good evening, everybody. Again, thank you for the opportunity to present. I did also present this same information at the Finance Committee meeting last Tuesday. Essentially, per your request, we've got our quarterly budget versus actual report with comments. I can distribute this if the other members of council haven't already. I actually intended to do that before this meeting and did not get that done. In the essence of time, we will look at where we are specifically to the general fund as of June 30th, or the close of the June month. Right now, we are tracking at just on about 13.5% under budget, which is a great thing. Everybody's doing a nice job managing things. We are, for your information, I'm sure you're all expecting it, we are tracking high on a few lines like fuel costs. There's some material costs in public works that are higher, largely associated with the cost of fuel, like stone and other raw materials are costing more to produce, so therefore they're passing those costs on to us. And then I think those are the two major ones. Oh, vehicle maintenance and repair is also tracking a little higher, and I think that's attributable to our, we kind of had that 1 year of our obsolescence strategy on the fleet being paused. So I think we're seeing a little bit of that right now. Hopefully that gets turned around as we move forward. I guess with that, I will happily try to answer any questions, and if you have any questions of individual department heads, they're here also. But I'll distribute this. Obviously, you can ask questions later too, but you'll notice over here, just like last quarter, there are comments in these lines that are either tracking over budget or are under budget or have no spend. There's lots of explanations why there would be no spend at this point. So with that, I'll ask any questions or offer to answer any questions.
Jeremy, again, I'd like to thank you for getting this to us. I think this is very valuable, very beneficial for us to look at it this way. I don't have a copy of this in front of me right now. I apologize, but and I don't remember the line. I would like you to tell me, remind me what Grand Park Consulting. That number was way off.
I would mumble through it, but I bet you Matthew can answer that pretty well.
Thank you.
Jeremy, did you email this to everybody up here?
I don't think I did yet, but I will for sure. I'll probably before the end of this meeting.
Yeah, good question. So Grand Park Consulting, as you may know, William Knox and Legacy Sports Group took over as a consultant on behalf of Grand Park for the 2022 season. When the budget was written, at that point, we didn't know what that cost was going to be. Therefore, it was not properly accounted for. I'm currently in process of updating for 2023's budget, but at the time did not have that number when we were going through this budget process.
So that's 100% of what that, I mean, that's that in
Correct.
its entirety.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
You got it.
Any others?
I think it's great. I'm glad, just to reiterate what Scott said, I'm glad you did this, and I encourage us to continue on that path of saving money, because ultimately, that's going to save the taxpayers money.
Yeah, certainly, and we're always mindful of that.
Yeah.
All right.
Any other questions, councilors, on the budget? Okay. I have one question on the budget, but Manny, this really kind of has to do with legal expenses. And so what I'd like to do is get together with you to review those. I pulled the legal expenses for the last 7 years. I asked the clerk's office to do that, and I've come up with an average. And it would appear that obviously in this year's budget, we did not budget the average, what we budgeted below average. So I'd like to kind of review that with you, okay? At the same time, I'd like you to take a look at invoicing by Taft, because the invoicing is still way behind where it needs to be. We haven't received any invoices yet for May, June, or July. So Taft is 90 days behind, and I think it would be, you know, if we're gonna stay on track, I kind of would like to see you guys invoicing within 45 days, if at all possible.
Yeah, happy to discuss.
Okay, so, but I'd like to meet with you sometime.
Sure,
next
shoot
week.
me some dates.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Counselor. And to that point, I've said it a couple of times, and I don't remember exactly where, but we will be coming to you all for an additional appropriation for legal fees. If you recall back in budget approval time, you all cut $300,000 out of the admin legal budget, which put us well below what our average trend had been. So we are going to come back asking for an appropriate amount of additional appropriation, but I would also like to allocate those dollars to the appropriate departments. So right now, everything hits an admin line. That's not a real like accounting of where the dollars are being spent. Many dollars go to Public Works, many dollars are to Plan Commission and RDC and all these other functions. So I would like for the future to be able to track those in the appropriate places. So that way everybody can understand.
We would too.
Yeah, yeah, all right, very good. So that'll come forth here in the next month.
Thank you.
Manny, the last time I had asked you about the legal fees, you had spoken to with the transition and change, that there's just a lot of things Taft had updated, redone, changed, and that was just going to cost, and that was what it was, and we, kind of said, okay, and thank you. I guess maybe this will be part of your meeting with Mike, but when are we done with that? Like, at what point have we, okay, we've explored everything, we've updated everything. I'm sure things come up as we go, but in our last conversation, it just kind of seemed like it was a specific targeted time period where we were looking through a lot of contracts, a lot of various legal, and so there was a lot of hours that were outside of our purview, and got it, but are we done with it yet?
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's a fair question. The short answer is no. As you can see with just the DWA agreement alone and what that's taken, that's 12 years old, that comes up. I would say that's not the majority of the work now, that it was in the first 6, 8, 10 months, where there was a lot of work of that nature. A lot of it is, I mean, you saw when we met, was it last year, to review it fully, just how many matters there are, 50 matters that are being managed or worked on with the city. The city is a pictured as the most regulated corporation in the world. Everything has lots and lots of red tape that has to be addressed. So as Jeremy said, Public Works, RDC, Plan Commission, in addition to the regular work, there are trademark issues, there are real estate issues, as you saw, there are litigation being managed, and I'm not talking about the things in the past and last year or the year before, but I would point out that even in that heavy spend year, we were still below what the prior attorney was in the last two. So it's, there's a lot of good work coming out of it because it's necessary, and it's necessary because there's a lot of great things happening in the city. But I would say by and large, that kind of, I don't want to be disparaging, but that kind of cleanup work is done. But yes, I mean, issues do creep up now and then. I'm happy to discuss that with you or anybody who wants to meet, including Mr. Johns. The hope is to kind of level set it at a point. But that level set is still going to be probably higher than what you would expect just because of the volume of work that comes through and that, folks like Kevin generate and and Jeremy and John and everybody else.
Yeah, that answers my question. I mean, obviously, we don't know how vast the purview. We want the city to be protected. We want us to be in the best shape but, like at a certain point, it seems like you guys have been here a long time. Have we gotten through all those loopholes that you went back to look through and tighten up and all those things? So, but it sounds like you're saying the vast majority of that's done, other than what, like, for example, the
Right,
DWA
whatever
agreement.
pops up, exactly. And there's a level set there, and then there's going to be, of course, the other condition is there's a wave of work coming just because of the amount of growth there is and the amount of development agreements, all the other good things that are happening. But Yeah, I mean, and the hope is, and what we've tried to do, and Kevin and his team can speak to it as well, and so can John Nail, is to implement processes early on where we don't have to be involved, right? That's the whole goal. It really is to diminish our involvement, but still protect the city. So we don't have to look at every public works project, whether it has this particular provision in it or not. We already sent those to him. He knows they have to be required. So for some of those rote types of issues, code enforcement, for example, early on work, that can be addressed internally. But when there's a trial, obviously that has to be borne by us. I know a lot of people here don't like him, Mr. Patton in particular, that a lot of legal work happens here, but I mean, it's
Love attorneys.
it's necessary. It's necessary to protect the city and to protect the taxpayer.
We like that diminishing your role comment. That was a good.
I know, he perked up when I said that.
Yeah, I know. That's why I started
Right.
laughing when you said that. I'm like, okay.
But even then, we're way below the spend of where prior council was, we're way below the spend of our sister cities that have internal departments, that have folks dedicated to it. They still have a lot of consulting fees, just because of the growth in this county. But good question.
So I've got a comment. I apologize, Mike. No, please. So I understand there's a lot of heavy lifting that needs to be done. There's a lot of procedures that need to be put in place, and I understand there's a lot of work involved with that. The idea, though, I'm confident the idea in being mindful of the budget and the number that was approved was to make sure that we were mindful of the spend. To kind of tie two things together here that are part of this conversation, we started the year, early in the year, let me put it that way. We got hit with $82,000 that we couldn't bill appropriately last year when we tried to make the corrections that needed to be made last year because the billing wasn't appropriate. So we started, we're trying to tighten our belt, we're trying to watch how the taxpayer dollars are being spent, and then we start the year I think it was $82,000 in the hole because of billing. It's there's a purpose in approving a budget, and it's not, hey, here's what we have to approve. This is not the money that we have to spend, and we'll go back and get more later. It's to be mindful of what you have to spend. I don't know what more to say. There are a lot of moving parts and pieces here as well. I understand there's a lot of work that needs to be done, but we need to be mindful of a budget as well.
Of course, and I appreciate that. And even at the time, I think people said it was, cutting it in half was not realistic, and I appreciate Mr. Johns wanting to meet about that.
Councilors, any other comments? Okay, moving on to old business then. First item under old business, discussion of resolution 1422. And the purpose of this is to discuss the potential sale of Grand Park and the loan repayment. Okay,
I'll take that, Mike.
thank you, Cindy.
And this doesn't really have much to do with the sale, for instance, of Grand Park, only that in terms of what is owed to Grand Park would become due. So just for everyone's notice, in 2014, and I've mentioned this before, the city council loaned Grand Park $6 million. And in section 3, there was no provision for interest, payments, anything like that. It just said that it would be reimbursed to the Infrastructure Improvement Fund as assets become available. And so, in my eyes, this has now become critical for several reasons. Grand Park is up and running to its full potential, as I understand right now, at least to the best of its capabilities, is not in the hole, and there is a potential sale. We don't know that for sure. But the proposals have come back, from what I understand. Right, Jeremy?
Nope.
Okay. And so I did sit down with Jeremy and Matt, and I proposed a repayment schedule that would be $500,000 a year for the next 12 years for the council to get that money back to put into our Infrastructure Improvement Fund. Jeremy did ask that I wait and not bring it forward until we had the proposals back, which that's why I didn't have this out beforehand. So here we are, and I'm looking to see this actually structured, and I will say that Jeremy has concerns with the specific repayment strategy that I have put forward, and I'll let you speak to that, Jeremy.
Jeremy, sorry, can I just add one thing before you go, just to make sure everybody's level set? The bids are due tonight, as Jeremy said, by 11:59. We want to make sure to give the same courtesy and attention to the bidders that are going to be submitting bids as they have committed to us in preparing them. So please don't talk about anything that could be seen as a prejudgment of this very long and intensive process that we hope to undertake.
Sure.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I think I can, quite honestly, it has nothing to do with the sale or not sale of the park. It has everything to do with our operating ability. The park is on year 8, I believe. Things are aging. We've been, that $6.5 million that we've talked about so many times of capital reserve or cash reserve that we have in that operating fund has a specific plan for it, including, several $1 million worth of the artificial turf replacement, which is starting later this year or beginning of next year. So those monies are going to continue to be burned down. I don't know that anyone minds us starting the process. I think it's great that we're starting the process. I think you're exactly right. In the original agreement, we didn't know when that would be. I think we can have money start flowing back now. But I think we really need to be mindful of how taking $500,000 of profit, we'll call it, right off the top impacts the bottom line as we look at capital expenses in the future. And the only thing that I would ask is if $500,000 is the number that we're sticking on, that we can at least every couple years, every few years, bring this thing back, take a look at it, look at where we are from a cash flow perspective. Matt can come up and explain to you what it is doing or isn't doing to the overall plan from a capital perspective, and allow that to be a little bit fluid so that we don't end up coming back to you all to ask for money to replace artificial fields because we don't have the cash to do so, or come back and have another loan to fund the first half of the year from an operating capital standpoint. We need about $1.5 million in cash sitting there to carry our costs and operate the park until revenues catch up, just like any business. So as long as everyone's willing to be a little nimble on this, I don't think anybody's pushing back that it's time to start paying this thing back.
I'm just going to speak on my behalf. Cindy's a lot nicer than I am. I would actually make a motion tonight to return the entire $6 million immediately, because if you're really looking for the most fluid motion and information to this city council, you would come and ask us for the money if you really needed it. If you needed something for turf or Grand Park or improvements or anything like that, you'd return the $6 million today or tomorrow at open of business, and you would ask the city council, say, hey, we need $1.5 million for this, or we need $500,000 for this. We can approve it or disapprove it. That's how we work as taxpayers. Because the way we're doing it right now, and I'm not pointing this at you, but I am, at the process, is what you're asking us to do is money that's owed us and should have already been paid to us, you're asking us to hold on because there might be some other things that you want to spend money on instead of paying back the person that you bought the car from. You know what I'm saying? It's like, hey, I'd make the payment, but I may have to fix the transmission. I don't want to have to ask you for more money, so I'm just not going to make the payment to you.
I'm saying that we are willing to make the payment. We're at a point in time where we're willing to make the payment. And when I say we're talking about the RDC making the payment.
Yeah.
Via their cash flow that is in and out of the 640 fund for Grand Park. We is not the city. We as the RDC, we are all the city.
Yeah. Again, I'm under the premise that I would make a motion this evening that the $6 million would be returned to us tomorrow, and then you can ask us for the money if you need it. And I may be the only person that would vote for it, but that's the way I feel, because it was lent to them, and it should have been repaid a long time ago. If it's needed for the park, so be it. then ask for it. But to not pay somebody back the money that you owe them.
So, yeah, and I understand where I'm getting a little confused is, so the money that is held in that $6.5 million is revenue generated by the park. So we would be sending that back to the taxpayers and then coming back and asking the taxpayers to fund improvements.
Absolutely, because guess what? It's the taxpayers' dollars.
I don't disagree with you there.
Would it be
I just don't
RDC
understand
then
why.
actually seeking the loans and not the city council?
Should probably.
Because
I
it
would
does
assume
matter,
so,
because
yeah.
then we're talking TIP funds and we're not
Right.
talking.
All of these things impact one another, and it all ends up costing infrastructure projects or whatever it might
And
be.
Cindy, please disagree with me if you think so. I mean, that premise behind gaining control of those dollars is that they're really the taxpayers' dollars. They're really not RDC's. They're owed back to the taxpayer. And yes, the RDC would then come back and ask us for the money if they needed money, and then we can either approve it or disapprove it. And that would be the most fluid motion for the taxpayers because it is our money. I mean, I want you to tell me if you disagree.
I mean, I agree in theory, but in the practicality matter of it, I also know that that is going to place a burden on them, a significant burden on them, at least in the short term, to try and figure out all that rigmarole. And
Maybe.
again, we're going back to more legal costs, more,
Well, and the RDC dollars are
bond
taxpayer
issuance.
dollars.
Yeah, but so I mean, again, I want to openly talk about it because you're right. They may have to come and put their numbers together, but you know what? Maybe the RDC has to get their act together and actually have a good plan that they present to the city council, and we know what's going on because we keep hearing that there's projects and we have this, and we may have this, and we may have this. Maybe the taxpayer should know where that $6 million is being spent each time, or what we're spending it on, or who's not improving their properties that they're managing currently. That now we're being asked to fund that for, because that may be going on right now. That we're saying, hey, we have to redo this. Well, shouldn't the people that are managing those properties, shouldn't they be doing it? I mean, I think it'll just spur questions and then we would be provided answers to how that $6 million is being spent. And again, it's just.
I mean, the other part of it is we've got huge infrastructure needs coming up next year, beginning of the year. And it would sure be nice if we had that $6 million to help fund those infrastructure needs. And chances are Grant Park, if they need money for fields, maybe they'll come to us for $1 million. But we've got $5 million to use on our infrastructure.
Otherwise, it's sitting in an entity that's actually, no offense to the mayor, it's controlled by the mayor, and whether we have two people on the committee or not means absolutely nothing, because it's actually controlled by the mayor without the vote of city council or representation by the taxpayer other than the vote for a mayor.
Devil's advocate though, guys, and we talk about this frequently, that we don't want to be paying more attorney fees.
Yep.
I know we don't want to pay more bond issuance costs. I know we don't want to, incur all these extra fees that wind up costing us hundreds of thousands of dollars. And so that's why I'm not wanting to go the route you're talking about in a way. I mean, there's parts of it I love, but I think it's ultimately going to cost us more to do that, and that concerns me.
If we have the $6 million, whether we have to, let's say we do a drainage project downtown and we had to do a bond issuance cost there, or the RDC had to do a bond issuance cost to get a $2 million funding for turf, what's the difference ultimately? I mean, I'm just playing the devil's advocate, because ultimately, if that $6 million, I don't think we're going to go spend that $6 million tomorrow, but at least it'd be back in the purview of the taxpayer as opposed to the RDC, which the taxpayer has absolutely no governance over.
The RDC is sitting on some cash in their accounts, and I think it would be prudent, if they're gonna borrow more money, they have to come to us in any event to approve that loan. Am I right, Counselor?
Meaning if the RDC wants to issue bonds, ultimately it has to come before.
Borrowings of any kind.
Yeah,
is
it
our-
always comes before the council, yes.
So they're gonna be coming to us to borrow money. I think it would be prudent for us to work with the RDC and set up a repayment schedule for this and get this cleaned up.
And just for clarity, Counselor, no one's asking to borrow any money right now.
I'm not, I
The only-
said, I know
The only
that,
thing
but-
we're doing is trying to prevent anyone from having to borrow money later by being mindful of the repayment schedule.
And you would,
And ultimately, if $500,000 is what you want, $500,000 goes into that document that I've requested for us to review, and we'll move this thing forward so we can
but
try to
we-
march on
we,
with our
we
plan.
can be kind and wait till the bids come in and there's more clarity about what might happen. But I think, pretty quick, we ought to find a repayment schedule on this thing after we receive those documents and get it cleaned up, you know, over a period of time, as Cindy has suggested.
Yeah, and candidly, and Cindy's bringing this at the right point in time, and we document a schedule now before any decisions are made, or really any proposals are reviewed for the Grand Park sale, and then you have what you need is a documented repayment schedule so that it clears up any concerns that if the park sells, the RDC won't pay the city back, which is what I hear as being the concern.
You know, I mean, and this is, here, I'm gonna be offensive for a second. So, you know, like I'm on this movie theme tonight, so let's talk about Moneyball, you know, when Brad Pitt's sitting up there and he's going, wah, 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 right? Cindy's been awesome. She's been asking about this ever since I got on city council. I mean, here we are 2 years later and we still don't have anything rectified. And I think at the finance committee, I even said, hey, by next Monday, we should have something in writing. So if we don't have it in writing, I'm just going to go ahead. I'd like to make a motion to collect the $6 million in full upon the next business day. That's my motion. I'm making the motion.
Do we have a second to that motion?
And you won't hurt my feelings if nobody seconds it.
I'll second it.
Okay.
Okay, Martha, we have a motion made to collect the $6 million this week.
And then if you guys need the money back,
Yeah.
if the RDC needs the money back, they can come and ask for it.
Absolutely. It's been made and seconded.
Before we vote, I need to ask clarification on that, just to make sure that I thoroughly understand what we're getting ready to vote on. In this scenario, again, the motion is that will be repaid, I think, as you stated, tomorrow, next business day. What impact, and I understand the large conversation we're having here, that's going to create some issues, certainly, but those issues will be in front of us, or at least have the visibility that we talk about wanting. I get that, and I agree with that concept. What immediate impact will that have on, let's call it the next 6 months, the next 12 months, for things that are out there right now?
Paying all the bills that they pay, like payroll and electric bills and water bills, and everything that it takes to operate the park is in jeopardy. And quite honestly, it doesn't come before you, it goes before the RDC. How they interact with you all, I don't.
How much money do they have right now?
It's right at $6.5 million.
What's your operating budget annually?
I'd have to talk, well.
I mean, we're in the most profitable season of the park. It's a park that makes money galore, right?
Do we also know, can Greg tell us the financial impact of this kind of outlay on existing debt service and reserves we have to have on hand and all the other things that we must take into account for bondholders?
So, yes, Greg Garitas could help answer those questions. The other thing that we have to consider about being able to pay tomorrow is none of these things are appropriated in the RDC budget or anything else. So if the $6 million is truly flowing back sometime soon, there's a whole legal process that hopefully the clerk can speak to.
How much is needed over the next 12 months for the operating piece?
Are you including the turf replacements and all the
Nope.
other capital improvements?
Nope, I'm talking about the operations of Grand Park.
So all in, our expenses this year will be around 5 million.
Yeah, it's about 480,000 though on the operations, on the budget, correct? I mean, for all the payroll, yeah, right, what we were going through?
You're referring to just salaries?
Yeah,
Salaries is considerably less, yes.
yeah. Okay,
How do you
so,
pay consultants? We have an agreement with a consultant, for example. Is
Right,
that
that's a
encompassed in
quarterly,
that?
that's a quarterly bill.
Is that encompassed within the 5 million? I was worried about breach issues.
It is encompassed within that 5 million, yeah.
Okay.
Hey, Matt, how much monthly do we typically pay on average?
Couple $100,000.
So if we take, you got 6.5 million, we take 6 million out, we leave you at the 500,000. And basically, you can't fund this Grand Park for more than a couple of months?
What I'm concerned about is the turnaround time. So if it takes, if it does require us to come to council and we need that immediate pay to be able to pay those vendors that we're working with on a day-to-day basis, what that turnaround time is, which is why we've asked for $1.5 million to $2 million as a cash reserve to be able to operate efficiently.
okay, all right.
So that's kind of where I'm getting. So clearly, everyone's in agreement that the repayment needs to start. What we're in disagreement over is how aggressive in the timetable per se of the 6 months. So we need clarity on a baseline minimum. Well, we need at least this much in cash reserve. So that was an honest answer to me. It sounds like you need to make sure you have $1.5 to $2 million in reserves, which means we shouldn't request $6 million because we don't want to, sink our own
Yep.
great asset here.
Yep.
So, but maybe we clearly should be able to collect at least the minimum of the $500,000, which was requested, and maybe even more aggressively than that. So,
How about 3 million, Jake? I mean, just to talk openly. See, stating that $6 million gets us at least the information, part of the information that we need. And no offense to Matt, but whenever you ask somebody, how much do you need? Oh, well, we need 5 million to operate. Oh, so we're not bringing in any money to the Grand Park. I mean, that's kind of what you're saying. I mean, it's like a cat and mouse game. It's like, hey, I need 5 million, 5.5 million to operate. So that means we're not going to bring in any money for the next 12 months, right? So now all of a sudden we're here in $1.5 million, which is better because now we understand what they may need for shortfall. So then, ask for 3 million or 4 million. I mean, I'm happy to amend the motion. But if we don't start some process, we're going to be here 8 years later. The next city councils are going to be up here going, man, I wish we'd start collecting that. And Cindy Spoljaric probably isn't going to be on city council then to keep hounding everybody. Right?
Here's the reality, if I could just say a few words here.
And that's accounting talk right there.
If I could just say a few words here. We worked hard to build up a nest egg of 6.5 million. We know we got costs coming. We know we've got capital investments we've got to make. Taking $6 million out of that fund is silly. It's silly. Now, I agree with everybody that this should have happened sooner, and I don't like disagreement, but I wasn't on council at the time, and this is what we've been dealt with. So I think coming up with a reasonable approach to start repaying this makes an awful lot of sense. But to take $6 million out of our capital fund, I don't know any business that would do that and think that's a smart decision. I think we've got to be real careful here, folks. Let's get this thing going, and we can adjust on the fly. If things start to improve at Grand Park, maybe we sell it and we just cash it out. I don't know. None of us know what the future holds, but to take that out, I think would be a huge mistake.
Scott, you sound prudent, but at the same time, I just said I'd even adjust it to the 3 million. The truth is, you had no idea what they were even operating at. You were willing to accept the 5 or 6 million. So the truth is, you don't really know.
Troy,
So-
don't
so
make
no.
this about me. I'm just simply.
I am making it about you.
I'm simply
I'm telling you
expressing my
your-
thoughts on this.
I'm telling you.
And you can disagree,
that
that's
it-
fine.
That's right, and you're welcome to disagree with me, and you can call anything you want silly. So that's why I said when Jake mentioned the amount, I said, I'm happy to say, change the motion to 3 million. I don't mind, but at least we're getting the answers that we need to know what we can collect.
I think everybody agrees with that, Troy. I think
Yeah.
Cindy made a recommendation of $500,000. And I think that's reasonable. You've made your motion, we need to vote on it. I'm just expressing my thoughts before I vote.
Legally, I can change that motion, right? In fact, you can change the motion up until the time that the vote's taken,
Yeah, you
correct?
can withdraw or change it.
Okay, I'll make a motion to withdraw the 6 million to collect tomorrow.
I would then make a motion that we approve a payment of $500,000 a year, that takes 12 years to pay that off.
Hold on though, Joe. So just so you guys know, we needed official language.
There's a motion on the floor. Let's just back up a step.
Yeah,
All right,
Councilman Edwards made a motion.
okay.
Well,
Mr. President, can you call for a second? And then we can have discussion.
Yes. Can I have a second, please?
I'll second that.
Okay. Motion's been made and seconded.
My problem with that is I can appreciate if circumstances hit and you want the repayment to be nimble, that we work together, we collaborate. Maybe COVID comes back, whatever, I get all that. But if we have this money held up in reserves that we feel pretty good about our ability to returf areas and so forth and so on, and then let's say it goes the other way though. We continue to make profit, we have banner years, well, why can't we not kick the 500,000 up to $1 million then? So I can appreciate that we should work together, but we should be as aggressive as we can about the repayment, just like we look at, we should have, all of this tonight is direct result of all the process over the last 8 years because we haven't paid back a dollar. So, you know, so I understand where it's at. But I just think as part of, if we agree on 500,000, why not be willing to be more aggressive if we do well, if we do better? Because it sounds like from Matt's comments that maybe we could be more aggressive if unless we do worse than we're doing now.
what's the lowest balance been over the last 12 months? Of the 6.5 million, what's the lowest balance been?
6 months. Last 6 months,
Last 12 months,
about 6 million.
6 million. I mean, I'm no math guy, but I'm pretty sure that we can get by collecting more. I mean.
Yeah, I think just to date, our strategy has been to use that cash reserve for those future capital expenses. If we're all in agreement here that I can come back to you guys for those capital expenses in the future, then I
Absolutely.
think we're in a good position.
Okay, all right.
Mr. President, my motion is on the floor.
There's been a motion made. The motion has been made to establish a repayment schedule at $500,000
Per year.
per year. And is that the motion?
It's been seconded.
It's been seconded, okay.
Starting when?
Starting when?
You tell me, Jeremy.
Joe, do you not want to be more aggressive than the 500,000?
Well, you know, debts are only repaid out of profit. And we always question, you know, without EBITDA, do we know really what the profit is? So we kind of have to take their word for it. And I don't want to pinch them when they get, you know, I don't want to kick them when they're down. And if we go for a big chunk, I know when I was in a lawsuit one time, I told them I'd been driving junk cars for a long time and I'd sure like to have a new one.
Yeah.
Well, I don't think we can do that here.
Yeah.
I don't think we can do that here. So I don't think we need to do that here, but I think we do need to put it on record, and I think it needs to happen systematically.
So Mike, do you agree with me
Yeah.
recalling my motion then, since you seconded it? Because I think he has to do that first,
I
actually,
did agree
because
with
I
it.
said
Yeah,
it.
I
And
did
then
agree
Joe
with that.
makes the motion, and then somebody else can second it.
Okay, are we having a discussion now about Joe's motion?
Can I answer
Okay, go
Counselor
ahead.
Edwards' question? The question was, when can it start? With an additional appropriation process, I think it could start as soon as that's done and then carry through 23 and on
Just so
to
we
forever.
get it in the budget.
Or it can be built into the 23 budget, however this council decides that it wants to do it.
So I had actually drafted some potential language and gave it to Ann, but we were just supposed to be discussing this today. It wasn't ready for the actual amendment because we wanted to hear from you guys.
Well,
It's just my
if we know the
opinion on this,
motion,
but-
then it'll make the agreement, the resolution much simpler.
But we don't have, right now, it didn't include the full repayment upon a potential sale. So we wouldn't want to wait the 12 years and all those payments if
Yeah,
there was a potential
I would think you can
sale.
build it in there that it has to be paid in full from proceeds of the sale should Grand Park ever be sold. Something of that nature that lawyers can craft.
I personally would still like to see more money coming back and us approving then what if there's a big expenditure that's needed. But, I mean, that's just,
And
I just let that
I guess
sit.
I'm agreeing with Troy, because, I mean, even if we could get $3 million back, because I'm looking down the road, and within the next couple months, we're gonna get hit up for $3 million plus
Right.
for our State Road 32 project. And we're gonna have to go out and bond that money. And if we can collect $3 million here, we might be able not to have to go and spend the money to get a bond
Right.
in 2 months from now.
Right.
So that's my thought. I mean, if you've got $5.5–6 million, and you can live on 3.5, past 3, that would sure go a long way. And then at that point, start a repayment schedule of $500 a year, starting next year.
I like the constructive disagreement, to be quite honest. I mean, it's.
I could even understand, and again, I'm not Dave Ramsey or whoever, but like, you have your fund built up that can cover liabilities and future planning, so you feel good about where that is. The repayment could be tied to profit. So if you don't have the year that you hoped you would have, maybe you can't pay back $500,000, maybe it's $250,000. But if you have an even better year, maybe you can pay back $1 million. And what if you make 2.6 million and you only pay us back 500,000? I'm not sure that that's, now that you've built your fund to be able to escrow into some turf and some things, which it sounds like you feel pretty stable. If not, tell us. Again, I want to work together and collaborate, whether it be you do worse or whether you do better, but let's be as aggressive as we can be without sacrificing the security of the park and the replacement of turf and all of those things, or the operating budget. I'm not asking to put you guys in any kind of bind, but I think if you just kind of, if you're not as aggressive about paying back debt as you could be, then it doesn't get repaid. You borrow something again eventually.
Thank you, Counselor. That's a good comment, and that is exactly what I suggested in my meeting with Counselor Spoljaric, was exactly that. So.
Did anybody second Joe's then? I mean, with that being
Yeah, it's
said,
already seconded.
Did
It's
somebody
It was
second?
already seconded, it's up for a vote.
So I was understanding where we are right now. I agree that we should have more upfront. I agree with Counselor Gilbert's assessment that there should be a minimum set, and if you have a great year, you pay back more. You pay back as much as you possibly can. I agree with that completely, but I think where we are right now, I think we have to acknowledge one of two things. I think we have to acknowledge that either we're going to vote on something rather hastily, or we're going to turn this into an ordinance or a writing session tonight to make sure that we cover every, dot every I and cross every T. I'm fine with either, but I think that that's what we need to acknowledge at this point in time. We're either going to sit down and draft this right here, right now with all of us, and make sure we cover things, all those moving parts. And I want to make sure also this doesn't become, forgive my terminology here, I can't think of a better way to put it, but this doesn't become a shell game. Well, wait a second, you know what? We have to pay this back over here, but we're going to go find funds over here because we have to take them away from this fund or whatever the case might be. So I don't.
That was my comment about having it be fluid and having them ask for money. The problem is, Scott, Joe made the motion. I think Scott Willis already seconded it, so we have to take a vote right now on the 500,000.
Well, we can continue to discuss it though. But again, where we are with it is either something that's done rather hastily or perhaps a more prudent approach of, and again, I understand the fact that we don't have this done yet. Shame on us, shame on the previous council, shame on everybody involved. I don't know what else to say.
Yeah.
I think it's more prudent to make sure that we've dotted all the i's and crossed the t's.
Okay.
I'd be happy to rescind mine second if Joe rescinds his first, to allow you to go back and write up something a bit more thorough, with a minimum payment of $500,000, with the ability to pay, a process to determine if you should pay more. I think that makes a lot of sense. I hate to see it rushed, quite frankly.
I'd sure like to buy a car that way.
Joe
But anyhow.
Joe has to rescind his.
Joe, you've got to
motion.
rescind your.
If he wants. If he
you want
doesn't,
to.
then we'll vote.
Leave it, we'll vote.
I'll rescind it.
I'll rescind mine.
Okay.
So by the next meeting, we'll have something in writing to take into account Jake's comments?
Yes.
Which,
Yes?
Cindy, you've already given that to Ann, right?
the majority of what,
So obviously, we have to consider any potential sale, we have to consider these comments that sounds like you're in favor of, perhaps of the nimble part of the repayment. And then
Yeah, but I
we'd
wanna-
have to
I wanna make
consider
sure we're
any
not-
front-end amount.
Well, let me just
maybe for
interject one thing.
2022.
Just like our last discussion that we had, do you want Jeremy to come up with what he thinks is, you said no, I haven't finished.
Say no.
Do you want Jeremy to come up and Matt? Or do you want them to work with Ms. Bulgaric as they started?
I'd rather them work with Cindy to come up with something incorporating what Jake was saying. That's what I would like.
Okay, that's one. What is
I
that?
think we all agree.
Is that a
to
consensus?
clarify though, is it a minimum 500,000
Yeah,
with
minimum.
more to be paid? Or
Well-
is it flexible below 500?
It's a minimum, it's above. Minimum.
Jeremy's asking for the flexibility in case
Exactly.
bottom
It-
dropped out.
We all had a really, really great year last year, which is an anomaly because of COVID. But if you look at the year before that with the actual COVID impacts of 2020, we pay $500,000 and we're in the red. The entire strategy for Grand Park was to build the revenue base, capture enough revenue to become self-sufficient so it's not a tax liability to our taxpayers, which is finally where we're getting to a point where we can start sending money back and still not be a tax liability to our people from an operations perspective. Keep in mind, yes, we have $6.5 million, but it took 8 years to get there, and until about 3 years ago, the taxpayers were carrying the salaries of those folks. It took us that long to get to a point where we're paying our own salaries. And now we're marching forward with a strategy that can hopefully continue to be that way so that operations of Grand Park are staying on its own dime. And then we can plan for capital improvements. Matt has a robust plan. I know Cindy has seen it. RDC gets a quarterly update. You all are welcome to see it as well. And it's not just, we want to put new benches here. It's like, this year we got to do 2 fields of turf. Next year we've got to do 2 fields of turf. And those are, $500,000, $750,000 chunks that are coming out. We have parking lots that need to be paved. We have other improvements that need to happen that don't require us to come back and ask for additional tax dollars. They're operational dollars and proceeds from operating Grand Park. So I am open to the $500,000. I would love to see it be nimble in case we have a bad year or in case we have an exceptional year again like we did in 2021. And then get it documented in the resolution, which I think is the appropriate thing to do, is amend the existing or repeal and replace the existing resolution with appropriate repayment terms. And we all move forward. We're all marching to the same goal. We're just trying to do it without coming back to ask for additional tax dollars to pay for the improvements that are going to be needed imminently.
Okay.
And you're sitting on what Cindy gave
Then
you.
our marching orders then, okay. Did you have anything else, Jake, first?
Well, what Cindy has already produced, I was asking, has that's been given to Ann, you're saying?
Well, not the actual more than 500,000 language. I mean, if revenue is available to do that. So that would have to be added to what I provided.
So Ann, as I understand it, we'd like Cindy and to meet with Jeremy, okay, and to work on the repayment schedule, okay. The 2 major items are that we'd like to, number 1, ensure that should Grand Park be sold, that the loan is repaid immediately, okay. Number 2, we would like a repayment schedule of a minimum of $500,000 per year, with the caveat that if the revenues are more, profits are more, that number would be nimbly raised, all right? And Jeremy, if you can come up with a formula, that would be very helpful if we include some type of a formula within the resolution. And then that resolution to be drafted to replace the Resolution 14-122. Is that accurate? Have it ready for next council meeting? Okay. Thank you, Jeremy.
President Jones, just before you moved on, you had two motions with 2 seconds. Troy withdrew his. I heard Scott withdraw his second.
Joe
I-
withdrew.
Okay, do you, as a matter of Robert's Rules of Order, I don't know. I'm simply asking, do you need to vote on any of these withdrawals since? Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, everybody. That was an excellent discussion. Okay, moving on to our next item, ordinance 22-28, the Midtown at Westfield PUD Amendment 1. This had a council introduction on June 13th. An APC public hearing was held on July 5th. APC gave it a favorable recommendation on August 1st, and it's up for consideration this evening. This ordinance deals with the proposed campus for community health network. And I think Lauren Gillingham from our Community Development Department is going to tell us more about it. Lauren?
Yeah, you covered it, Mr. President. So, good evening, council. For the record, Lauren Gillingham with the Community Development Department. The item before you this evening is the amendment to the Midtown at Westfield PUD, which proposes to modify development standards for an 100,000 square foot health pavilion. This item was introduced at the June 13th council meeting, received a public hearing at the July 5th Plan Commission meeting, and was forwarded to you this evening with a unanimous favorable recommendation from the APC, granted at their August 1st meeting. Matt Skelton of Church, Hiddle, and Antrim is present this evening to make a presentation. Thanks.
Good evening, members of the council, Mr. Mayor. I will dispense with a full-blown presentation. We were last before you June 13th. This proposal really has not changed. The proposal itself has not changed since you've seen it. There have been some changes to the PUD made, which has really not affected the proposal. But there's just additional text was added to ensure that the exhibits that are attached to the PUD are locked in. The language is just more firm and stronger requirements. And there were some changes made that provide for a special kind of shielding on the street light fixtures to be used on the main north-south road along the east side of the property. And we've worked closely with the Hinkie team to make sure we were selecting the kind of fixture that they intend to use in other places within the development. So that's really it, and I'm happy to respond to any questions, but I'll stop there. Thank you for your consideration.
Councilors, questions, comments? Hearing none, do I have a motion?
So moved.
I have a second.
Second.
Motion made by Joe Edwards, seconded by Troy Patton. Marla, would you call the vote, please?
Jake Gilbert,
Yes.
Mike Johns,
Yes?
Scott Fry,
Yes.
Troy Patton,
Yes.
Joe Edwards,
Yes.
Scott Willis,
Yes.
Cindy Spilcherik.
Yes.
Thank you, Matt. Next item, ordinance 22-30, additional appropriation of the 2019 and 2020 GEO bonds. Set a council introduction on June 27th, and it's scheduled for a public hearing this evening, followed by adoption consideration. Jeremy, can you give us a brief explanation?
Yeah, and I apologize that it didn't come back until now. Because the amount changed based on my calculation error, and the original introduced ordinance, the public hearing had to be renoticed with the new amount. So it pushed us past the first July meeting. We didn't have a second July meeting, so we're just now coming back. Essentially, this $3.54 million is the bond proceeds from the 2019 and 2020 GEO bonds that were not budgeted in 2022 for spend. So this is an additional appropriation to budget these dollars that are already being spent, quite honestly, on the things that you all approved in those ordinances to be able to pay them and balance the books at the end of the year.
As I recall, this was just, we just neglected to get it into the budget. It should have been there.
Yeah, if I recall, we haven't appropriated these into an approved budget in the past years. For whatever reason, something changed or requirements changed and they needed to be appropriated this year. So that's what we're doing, to meet that requirement that Cindy has requested, or I'm sorry,
Okay.
Ms. Gossard.
That being the case, at 8:54, I'll open the public hearing. Kevin, do we have any cards or emails?
No, sir.
Okay, well, let's just give it about 30 seconds here. Okay, at 8:55, we'll close the public hearing. Counselor comments, questions? Hearing none, do I have a motion?
Well, I had one. So you're saying, Jeremy, you said we're already spending that money. We did buy all these vehicles. We did go through with what the plan was.
We are actively doing that now, yes. So vehicle lead times have been really long. So we are ordering things back then, we're paying for them now. This didn't get approved until right at the end of 2020, I believe. 19 was a different story. 2020 is when this got approved right at the end, or early 21 even maybe. And so we've been catching up. But yeah, there's a road construction project going on, that's the bulk of these dollars. And then police vehicles, fire vehicles, and public works vehicles and equipment.
The needs we approved are still,
Yes, it's still in line with the things that you approved. We're just now getting to purchase them and pay for them.
So any other comments, questions?
Motion to approve ordinance 22-30.
Have a second? Motion made by Troy Patton, seconded by Scott Fry. Marla, would you call the roll, please?
Mike Johns,
Yes.
Scott Fry,
Yes.
Troy Patton.
Yes.
Joe Edwards.
Yes.
Scott Willis.
Yes.
Cindy Spalgeric.
Yes.
Jake Gilbert.
yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jeremy. Next item, we move into our new business category, Resolution 22-111, additional appropriation for the Westfield Library. As a council introduction this evening, will be followed by a public hearing this evening, and is also up for adoption consideration tonight. Cheryl Zollers is here, and she's going to give us a brief explanation.
Good evening, Council. I'm Cheryl Sollers. I'm the Executive Director of the Westfield, Washington Public Library. We are here, I also have Mike Reuter, who is our financial advisor, and he will explain a little bit in more detail about this additional appropriation. But what we are doing is we want to do an additional appropriation to spend the money from the proceeds of the sale of the current building to purchase the land on the new library building. So I'll have Mike explain a little bit more.
Good evening, Council and Mayor. The additional appropriation takes us beyond the authority of the library board itself. Anytime a library exceeds what's called the 6-year non-farm personal income factor growth in their budget, they have to come to the appropriate fiscal body. And so the library board could not take action on their own to get the proceeds appropriated. Essentially what's happening, they will sell the property that they are in currently. They'll receive those funds. They'll deposit those funds into their general fund. In a library situation, when a property is sold, the proceeds go to the general fund. However, we'll be closing on the property, the new property and the new location for the library. We're going to use the bond proceeds account. And so what we're doing is actually appropriated in two places. The dollars from the sale of the existing building will go to the operating fund. We're appropriating them out of the operating fund, and then we'll repay the construction fund. And so, but the land itself will be purchased then out of that construction fund. So it looks odd that we're appropriating the same amount, but it's the way the cash flow is, because we have to put the sale of the property into the operating fund, and then we will repay the construction fund. So that's essentially what's happening this evening. We're not asking for additional dollars. These are dollars. We're not asking for any additional taxing or any additional revenue. This is all coming from the sale of the property, the existing property.
All right, this item requires a public hearing, so let's open the public hearing at 9 o'clock. And again, Kevin? No cards?
No cards.
Okay. Let's give it again and give it about 30 seconds, and we'll close the public hearing. Okay, we're going to close the public hearing at 9:01. Counselors, questions, comments?
I'll make one comment. Because of my service on the library board, I will be recusing myself of this vote.
Thank you, Counselor Willis. Questions, comments? Okay, can I have a motion then on Resolution 22-11?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Motion made by Cindy Spaljerik and seconded by Joe Edwards. Marla, would you call the roll, please?
Scott Fry,
Yes.
Troy Patton,
Yes.
Joe Edwards,
Yes.
Cindy Spaljerik,
Yes.
Jake Gilbert,
Yes.
Mike Johns.
Yes.
Motion passes 6-0, 6-0 with one recusal.
Thank you. Moving on to Resolution 22-112, City Calendar Agenda items for the first meeting of each month. This is up for adoption consideration this evening. Let me explain this again to you since I kind of wrote this. This resolution is introduced to improve processes and procedures. The purpose of the resolution is to establish a schedule of special presentations, reviews, reports, and other matters throughout each calendar year to better ensure a proper flow at meetings. The clerk treasurer will follow the schedule that is attached here, place items on the agenda in the designated months as set forth in the attached calendar. Other counselors, questions or comments? Can I have a motion then?
I'll make a motion to approve Resolution 22-112.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Motion made by Scott Willis, seconded by Troy Patton. Marla, would you call the roll, please?
Troy Patton,
Yes.
Joe Edwards,
Yes.
Scott Willis,
Yes.
Cindy Spaljerik,
Yes.
Jake Gilbert,
Yes.
Mike Johns.
Yes.
Scott Fry.
Yes.
Motion passes 6-0.
Thank you. Next item, ordinance 22-33, Lantern Commons PUD Amendment 1. It's had a council introduction this evening. It will be up at the APC public hearing on September 6th. And then after that timeframe, it will be to be announced in the future. I think we've got Weston Rogers from our Community Development Department with us to explain.
Yes. Good evening, Council. For the record, Weston Rogers with the Community Development Department. The item being introduced before you tonight is a proposed amendment to the Lantern Commons PUD. The Lantern Commons PUD district is located northeast of the intersection at US 31 and 161st Street. The proposed amendment is related to the 12 acres of real estate located along the east side of the district. The petitioner is proposing to modify the concept plan, general regulations, and development standards to permit a health and fitness club within the district. This petition is scheduled to be heard at the September 6th APC meeting. Matt Skelton of Church, Hiddle, and Antrim is here tonight to present details of the project. He's available to answer any questions, as am I, should you have any for staff. Thank you.
Okay. Good evening, members of the council, Mr. Mayor. For the record, my name is Matt Skelton with Church, Hiddle, and Antrim with offices at 116 North Union Street here in town. With me this evening, where did he go? There he is. He moved on me. Scott Ferguson with Lifetime. Lifetime is excited to share with you its plans for a new high-end athletic club facility within the Lantern Commons area. In addition to the normal things that you would find in a health and fitness type center, this is a little grander than that. There are health and wellness uses within the facility, along with childcare for folks dropping off while they do what they are doing at the club, food and beverage services, professional offices, member services, and also some limited retail as it relates to health and fitness. The proposal before you this evening, essentially, the main purpose of it is to merge what was identified originally as Areas A and Area B in the original approval, which contemplated some more intensive nursing home and institutional type uses towards this end, and business use, and actually fitness center as a permitted use in this area. As part of this proposal, the PUD ordinance before you actually provides for incorporation of the detailed plan that you have before you, this revised concept plan here. So it is referenced by reference in the PUD, and there would be there's a requirement that the site be built in substantial compliance with this, and also it incorporates building elevations that are also before you in your materials in the same manner. We did have the opportunity to meet with our abutting neighbors that immediately abut this project on the north side of the property line here, just to provide some updates. Last week on the overall project, Front Street Partners was present to provide that information to neighbors. And then while they were meeting, the Lifetime folks were able to share their vision for this property here. The meeting this proposal was received pretty positively, and I'll explain to you, I think, the things that came into play. The neighbors expressed support in the fact that in the previous concept plan that was approved, there were buildings that are permitted to be constructed within 50 feet of this, of the north property line. And the buildings in this area were contemplated as being as tall as 3 stories. In this revised submission to you, there is a minimum setback included in the proposal that would not allow a building to be constructed within 550 feet of that property line. That's a significant increase. Additionally, there's a limit of 2 stories instead of 3 stories, which makes it a little bit more neighborhood scale. I think there was expression from the neighbors of a belief, I guess, that a fitness club would be a little bit more of a complement to the neighborhood than an institutional use. A couple of the neighbors were grateful to learn that they might not hear ambulances showing up randomly at the nursing homes that were planned on the north end, which really wasn't even discussed when the original zoning was going through. At least I don't recall it. And we've already made one change that you will notice. This first plan is what is before you in your packet. Since this plan was put forth, there's been a revision made to move this Natalie Wheeler Trail connector to the south side of the drainage retention area to provide that same connectivity, but pull that pedestrian movement a little farther from the north property line. Also, it's hard to make out at this scale, but I've got a kind of a zoomed in look at this area right here, where there's essentially a trail hub to be constructed that we are proposing. The ordinance does not include this as it is written today, but it will be incorporated by the time it gets to the Plan Commission for public hearing, which will include a bike station area here on the trail, along with some sitting areas, and if Public Works is acceptable to this, we will do some kind of special trail node treatment here and provide an entrance onto the property. We will be hosting a larger neighborhood meeting in compliance with the city's PUD ordinance. As soon as we get that meeting set, we'll let you all know when it is, and we're certainly happy to have you join. Lifetime intends to begin work on the site as early as possible next year. There's a lot to be done between now and then, but if it could be as early as early second quarter of next year when they would like to begin work. We look forward to working with the city as we move through this process, and would be happy to respond to any questions or comments that you may have at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt.
Matt, is there a retention pond across Union Street, just to the east there?
To the east?
Yeah, that kind of.
Can you pull up the?
I think there's one proposed in there somewhere.
There could. I'm not familiar. Oh, yeah, sure. Yes, there's not one there today, but I'm not sure if that's.
I think there's one proposed kind of in that corner because it's a low spot. Those things close to the road kind of have to be walled off or people will get in them. And they're deep. Some of them are deep.
And the scale on this, you'll have to forgive me, but I know the retention area that is shown here on this exhibit is probably about 50 feet away from the closest pedestrian area.
But is there a berm or something that keeps them from?
If there is, I don't know. It hasn't been designed to that level yet.
Well,
we have to go through the Public Works Department and comply with all their standards for vehicular safety, and if we have to put in something, then we have to put
I just remember in this one on 32, there was a guy they had to fish out of there, and they.
Sandpiper Lakes.
Sandpiper Lakes, and this could be, I think there's one proposed for the other side of the road there too. We're gonna have to devise some sort of picturesque way to keep cars from going in that. I mean, you think they don't, but they do. I don't know how.
I'm making notes. Thank you.
Matt, I have two questions, if I may.
Sure.
On the south side of the building, there appear to be some outdoor features.
Yes.
Question one is, what do you anticipate there? And then certainly I know what the hours of a health club are, certainly.
Sure.
I'm there all the time. But for those that might not know, what are the hours of this facility?
So I can get you that information. I don't know it right now.
We're not talking.
It's not a 24-hour.
Okay.
There will be service people cleaning things, of course, on the off hours. But
Okay.
These are pickleball courts.
Okay.
In this location. This is a lap pool, and this is a recreational pool deck area, and a little bistro area here.
Okay.
And this is all fenced. That you can only access this from inside the club.
Thank you.
Matt, I do have to say something, and I just want to let you know up front. I do have a concern with this use, primarily because in this project, when we approved it, and you start thinking things like the assessed value, we were looking at 2 multi-story office buildings and the assisted living facility. And now instead of all those things, I'm getting 1 fitness facility.
And what was the concern? I didn't hear it.
Things like assessed value, jobs being brought in. It's very different from what I was sold with this original project. So, this area was supposed to be job creating, think office use kind of thing.
Mhm.
And so when I see a fitness center here instead of, you know, things like an office building, I get concerned.
Yeah, those were three-story office towers that were contemplated in the area that you're referring to here. But I can provide some additional information as far as assessed value and job creation and things of that nature, if that influences you.
It does, you know.
I think the reason the neighbors preferred it was because it allowed some more buffering and transition. And I don't think this was as important of a point, but the land use was seen as being a little bit more community-centric than what you're describing.
It is to an extent, and there's a few things I have with that. There's extensive parking that goes along with this. And a lot of these larger centers, such as this one, are known for significant crime issues, the smash and grabs. And when we're talking one like this, with this location almost right next to US 31, that concerns me. So this would be a prime target for something like the Felony Lane Gang, for instance, if they were still operating.
Well, I'll do my best to try to address crime for you, but I don't know if I can do that in zoning.
Yeah, I don't want to add a prime target to our location right here. And it is, how many parking spots do you have for this?
I can get some calcs on what their other facilities have. I mean, this is a conceptual plan right now, so I don't know that it's locked in, but I can provide that information to you.
All right, thank you.
I don't know off the top of my head.
I would just say that I share Cindy's concerns, Matt. I mean, when I approved this project, when I voted to approve my part of this project, it was with the idea that it was going to be assisted living, that it was going to be bringing more jobs to the community, that it was going to be a very quiet, low-key building in the evening. We now have a subdivision, an old town subdivision being built right across the street, townhouses facing that street, facing the parking lot, the lights, the lighting. I think it significantly changes the character of that street at this point. And so yeah, I've got some pretty significant concerns. So just FYI.
And I'm happy to discuss this with you further if you like. We were, in our estimation, we thought the changes were probably positive because instead of having buildings fronting immediately up on the right-of-way, which this was designed to do, this was designed to provide trail access. That same trail access is being provided without having the taller buildings, closer to the road. So happy to discuss that with you further, but thank you.
Thank you. The comments? Hearing none, thank you, Matt. And we look forward to seeing you at the APC.
Thank you very much, appreciate it.
Next item, ordinance 22-34, Austrian Pine PUD Amendment 1. This had a council introduction on this evening. And then it'll be moving on for an APC public hearing on September 6th also. We've got Lauren Gilliam will again explain this to us.
Got it. Okay. Good evening. So for the record, Lauren Gillingham, the Community Development Department. The item before you this evening is a proposed amendment specific to Lot 3 of the Austrian Pine PUD on the screen in front of you. This is the site which Ortho Indy is currently being constructed. This amendment would modify language so that up to 2 buildings may exceed the maximum setback as opposed to being a requirement. Kevin Buckheit of Krieg Duval is here this evening to give a brief presentation.
Thank you.
My name is Kevin Buckheit. I'm a planner with the law firm Krieg DeVault, and I've got a little bit of old school paper for you tonight. I'll go electronic next time.
Been a long time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I'll go through those handouts after a few brief remarks here. As you are well aware, OrthoIndy is developing several buildings on a 6.38 acre parcel. It's Lot 3 in Austrian Pine PUD subdivision. And with an address range of around 250, there are actually going to be 3 addresses for the 3 buildings that will be built there. The initial phase is an orthopedic clinic. That's the east building. The second phase, which is going to be presented to you fairly soon now, is an orthopedic surgery center, and that will be connected to the clinic building itself. Third phase will be the west building, and that's going to be an office building, presumably a medical office building. The setback requirement of the PUD, section 9.2, states that a minimum of 2 buildings shall exceed a maximum setback that is actually in the UDO State Road 32 overlay, part of the ordinance. It's a little bit hard to wrap my head around that, where you've got a maximum setback and then you've got requirement to exceed it with 2 buildings. But the thought behind the design of the PUD was to provide for staggered building setbacks in that PUD. My understanding is that the city did not want to see a soldier row of buildings all fronted at the same line. And as the PUD is being developed, that's actually not happening, and I'll share that in a minute. Again, the goal is to provide for the staggered building setbacks. At this time, 3 of the 5 buildings have been constructed in the PUD, and section 9.2, as it's written currently, would require the other 2 buildings to exceed the 120-foot setback from the right-of-way of State Road 32. This is problematic for the cohesive and aesthetic development of OrthoIndy and its trio of buildings. The clinic and surgery center will function independently from a client's, patient's perspective, yet interdependently from the perspective of the doctors who necessarily and seamlessly need to be able to move between the 2 buildings. It is important that these 2 phases align more closely than the 120-foot plus required setback as it's written today would allow. Another factor that is part of the design discussion here is that all of the stormwater facilities are located on the south property lines along 175th Street, and that makes site design pretty difficult without throwing all of the parking areas out onto State Road 32. And I don't think that's what was intended by the ordinance either. As the PUD is developing, the staggering of buildings fronting on State Road 30 is happening naturally. The stormwater detention facilities play into that, as I said, and then the north property line is actually not a straight line. So it's playing a role in getting the staggering of the buildings that was desired. OrthoIndy would like to revise the PUD language of section 9.2 in order to remove the mandate that at least 2 of the buildings exceed the 120-foot setback, but then at the same time retain the requirement for the staggered buildings. These are the questions before you, and I'll go through the handouts now. The first one is a layout of the existing PUD language there at the top. The second section there explains the proposed PUD language, and that is that a maximum of 2 buildings may exceed the maximum setback, and that's, again, to allow flexibility if somebody wants to do that over time. And then to maintain the building setbacks, no 2 adjacent buildings shall be constructed at the same distance from the center line of State Road 32 in order to provide for the staggered building setbacks. The bottom half there is from the UDO, it is from the State Road 32 overlay ordinance, and explains how the 120-foot maximum setback is established there. The next handout that I've given you is Exhibit C from the Austrian Pine PUD ordinance, and it is an illustrative layout of the staggering that the city wanted to see there. It's just for illustrative purposes. Then I think the next thing that I've got for you there is a location map. You've been provided a location map, but this one shows the construction of the orthopedic clinic and the rest of the site being prepared for additional development. The next handout is something that I generated off of the county's GIS. GIS isn't 100% accurate, and I'm probably messing with the accuracy a little bit more as I try to do this, but I wanted to get an idea of where the maximum setback would be if it was all along the frontage on Lot 3. And the dark line there, the dark blue line, is what that setback would be. The first foldout that you have is a draft site plan. The building in yellow is the clinic. The building in blue shown there is the surgical center, and you can see how they are abutting each other to, again, allow for the seamless moving back and forth by the physicians to their patients in either the clinic or the surgical center. The other thing I added to this was the dark line that shows how the building setbacks along 32 are being staggered as the buildings are constructed. You've got the paint store on the east side, then the clinic, the surgery center, the future office building, and then on the west, you've got the tire center. And none of them is very close to being on the same plane away from State Road 32. The last exhibit is a multi-page exhibit that has been developed. And this again is draft, but it's a pretty good configuration of what the perspectives on the proposed buildings for ortho-indy, except for the medical office building, would look like. Not only are the two components there offset from each other, but the facades facing State Road 32 also have numerous facade breaks to add interest and additional setback relief from State Road 32. I'll stop there and try to answer any questions you may have.
Councilors, any questions?
I guess I do have one question. So I understand the request. If the request is not approved, how does that impact the go forward?
The ortho-indy site plan, that second last exhibit, can't happen like this, and they won't have the efficiency of movement back and forth, because this building would actually end up aligning near the south corner of the clinic, and it's just functionally inefficient for the operations that they're proposing. Because there's, right now it's required a minimum of 2 shall exceed the setback, and that would be this building and this building would have to.
So without it, you can't move forward, is what you're saying?
Not without a lot of head scratching by those who know their operations more than I do.
Councilors, any other questions? Okay. Hearing none, we thank you, and we look forward to seeing you at the APC at the September 6th meeting.
Yes, sir.
Thank you
all.
very much. Okay. Moving on, ordinance 22-35, Unified Development Ordinance Amendment for the Floodplain Administrator and Floodplain Overlay District. This has a council introduction tonight, followed by an APC public hearing on September 6th. Kevin, Todd, are you going to address this for us?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. President. Members of the council, good evening. For the record, Kevin Todd, Community Development Department. This item before you is really a complete replacement of our current floodplain overlay in the Unified Development Ordinance. Department of Natural Resources with the state of Indiana has updated their model ordinance and really is asking all communities that participate in the National Flood Program to adopt this ordinance. So this really is essentially the state's ordinance put into our UDO format. So you'll notice as you go through the different exhibits, we've broken down the administrative section into Chapter 3 of our UDO, and then the balance of the model ordinance is really a complete replacement of our current ordinance in Chapter 5. So happy to try to answer any questions this evening, or we can get you answers, but really it is essentially just adopting the state's ordinance.
Councilors, any questions? Cindy?
Has there been any change to the map itself?
This has no impact on the map. I think there are some changes, but this is not tied to that at all. This is really the administration of restrictions on development and various rules and regulations for development within the floodplain. It has no bearing on the map itself.
Okay. Hearing no other comments, thank you, Kevin. We look forward to getting this
Great.
back.
Thank you.
Next month. Okay, moving on to ordinance 22-36, stormwater utility rate. Has a council introduction tonight. We'll have a public hearing on August 22nd, and it'll be up for adoption consideration on September 12th. Jonathan Nail is going to explain this ordinance to us.
Good evening, Council. Thank you for bearing with us tonight and everyone else in the audience. Tonight we're talking about our stormwater utility. This is an introduction to ordinance 22-36. For the record, John Nail, City of Westfield, Department of Public Works. And go ahead, Kevin. So we're talking about our stormwater utility. Some of these slides may look familiar. We had a council education session with several council members earlier a couple weeks ago. We do have a stormwater utility here in Westfield, and essentially what a stormwater utility does is it charges a fee to property owners to manage their stormwater runoff on their property. It functions the same as a user utility would, such as water or sanitary, in that it is the fee is driven by the use itself. So we established a stormwater utility here in Westfield in 2007, and that stormwater utility revenue pays for projects such as capital improvement projects, maintaining compliance with federal and state regulations, as well as just general maintenance of our storm sewer system. And with the last rate adjustment that we did here in the city of Westfield was in April of 2016. So currently, a residential property owner pays $4.16 per month for their stormwater utility bill. So the stormwater utility is a dedicated funding source. Like I said before, it is a user-driven utility, such as water or wastewater, and it is determined, at least for commercial properties, by impervious area. So the more impervious area you have on your property, the higher fee you pay as you generate more runoff that goes into our storm sewer system. Residential property owners, like I said, just pay a flat fee of $4.16. And commercial users pay multiples of that. It's a very common mechanism. There are 95 stormwater utilities here in the state of Indiana and over 1,800 in the United States. The nice things about stormwater utility, it is a dedicated funding source. The revenues are sustainable and also bondable if need be. And it keeps some of these expenses that are necessary within the city of Westfield from going to the general fund. So it is a revenue source that we utilize for necessary expenses to maintain our stormwater utility, or our stormwater system, which improves our water quality for our residents. We sit at the top of the watershed here in Westfield. The things we put in our streams flow downhill and downstream to our neighbors. So what we do has an impact both on our residents as well as our neighbors. So challenges that we've seen, particularly recently in the market, material costs have gone up, as we all probably have experienced at home. Labor costs have gone up as well, which has causing cost increases to these projects that we do to maintain our storm sewer system. Additionally, in December of 2021, IDEM, the Indiana Department of Environmental Management, put forth some new regulations related to managing stormwater discharges for cities. These new regulations require additional training, inspection of the system, inspection of the storm sewer system, educational outreach programs, and annual reporting, which will add costs to Westfield staying in compliance as well. So like I said, the stormwater utility funds a variety of things that we do here in the city. Capital improvement projects are the biggest one. Compliance is another major one, but it also can fund staff salaries and benefits, vehicles and equipment, and other training and certifications as needed here in the city. Again, I want to note that these are things that we have to do regardless of whether we have a stormwater utility or not. The value of the stormwater utility is that it does generate revenues for us to pay for these things versus it going to the general fund. So our current rate structure, like I mentioned before, residential property owners pay a 1 ERU, which is an equivalent residential unit. And to break down how that's calculated, we essentially took all the residential properties in Westfield and looked at the impervious area for each one and found an average. That average is 3,500 square feet of impervious area for residential properties in Westfield, and that becomes the ERU, equivalent residential unit. That's the basis for what we charge property owners, and again, our current rate is $4.16 per ERU. Commercial and industrial property owners pay multiples of that ERU based on their actual impervious area. So again, as an example, if a new business comes to Westfield, they have a 35,000 square foot impervious area, inclusive of parking, roof lines, et cetera. They would pay 10 ERU or $41.60 per month. There are some discounts for municipal facilities, especially like our school system, our school corporation, as a tax exempt community, pays half an ERU, and unimproved properties pay 1/3 an ERU flat fee. So our stormwater utility has already funded several projects in the city of Westfield. Some of these you may be familiar with. The Sleepy Hollow Drainage Improvement Project is just east and a little north of here in the Sleepy Hollow residential neighborhood. That project was completed, started in 2017 and completed in 2018. It's a neighborhood that had serious ponding and flooding concerns that were long-term due to failed old tiles or just insufficient storm sewers to begin with. And we came in and updated their storm sewer system and made significant improvements to their drainage in the neighborhood. And one of the bigger ones we've already done is the sanitary lagoon closure mitigation at our public works facility just north of city services. This was an old sanitary lagoon that was utilized at one point to process sanitary sewage. It's a bit of an archaic form of doing it. It had long since gone beyond its design lifespan, and we were required to mitigate those lagoons and did so utilizing stormwater dollars. It was a rather large price tag of $3.1 million, and it required a lot of mitigation as well as testing, and IDEM came out eventually certified that we were indeed compliant, and that's going to pave the way for our Simon Moon Expansion Park project as well. So just a couple of samplings of what we've done in the past with stormwater funds. I'll touch more on what we plan to do in the future here in a few minutes, but there's a couple of projects listed there. So tonight, Sheila McKinley, as well as Wes Root are here. Sheila McKinley is with Christopher Burke, who helped us do our rate study and our stormwater master plan. And Wes Root is our stormwater coordinator here at the city of Westfield. So we looked at the next 5 years, identifying exact expenses that we foresee needing to accomplish within our storm sewer utility. These include capital projects mostly, but also include some other areas where storm utility dollars can be utilized. So this is a breakdown of the 5 years of expenses that we foresee coming within our city. I think it's important to note that over 65% of the revenues are being proposed to be used on capital improvement projects. Those are the projects that residents see the most, as the ones that they feel the most benefit from. And it's important that we're utilizing those dollars to the maximum to fund capital improvement projects within our storm sewer system. Additionally, there's some operational expenses. About 29% of the revenues are projected to go towards operations, inclusive of some staff salaries plus benefits, as well as vehicle operations, inspection equipment, and things of that nature. And then 6% towards administrative staffing needs within our department. So that breaks down to this pie chart, 65% capital projects. Again, we try to shoot for a vast majority of funds being utilized towards capital projects, and then the various breakdowns of the other categories. So with that information of the 5 years of costs, we utilized Christopher Burke and some of their resources to look into what a rate would need to be to provide revenues that could fund those expenses over the next 5 years and indeed beyond the next 5 years. Using their resources, we came up with the result of, by 2027, needing a stormwater utility fee of $6.13 to have a sustainable program within Westfield. Now, rather than jumping to $6.13 right off the bat, we felt it was prudent to graduate these increases over 5 years. So what you see before you is the proposed rate increase schedule, and it includes a 39-cent annual increase from 2022 to 2027 to get us to that $6.13 sustainable revenue mark. Beyond 2027, we are proposing a 3% increase annually in perpetuity, or until we need to come back and do an additional rate study at the guidance of council and other administrative officials. So what are we getting for this proposed rate increase? What is the ROI for our residents? Some of the biggest ones I want to touch on are these capital projects that we foresee that are in our stormwater master plan. So the biggest one is Union Street and Penn Street drainage project. Penn Street right out in front of the building we're in tonight. We get heavy rains. The storm sewer system on this street is rather old, frankly, and could even be undersized. We get some ponding on Penn Street. That's leading to some deterioration of pavement and curb conditions as well. It's one that we've identified for a long time that we would like to do, inclusive of storm sewer reconstruction, and street, sidewalk, and curb improvements. And additionally, along North Union Street as well, utilizing a storm sewer reconstruction project and perhaps even some rain garden concepts similar to what we've done on South Union as one of the big capital projects we've identified in the next 5 years. Additionally, there's some smaller ones, the Grassy Branch flooding that is on the right side of the screen. There's some flooding issues that perpetuate at Grassy Branch just south of 203rd Street. A culvert replacement project is proposed for that. Similarly, at Tomlinson Road, just south of 199th Street, gets some flooding, and we've got a swale and culvert replacement project identified in our master plan for that. Southridge Subdivision ponding is, again, a perpetual ponding situation that we want to deal with, and estimated costs are provided both on here and in our stormwater master plan, which is in a draft phase currently, and we will distribute that to you when it's final. And then lastly, the Centennial Subdivision, SSD replacement. It's been an ongoing project for us at Public Works, maintaining and replacing some old SSD that was installed when Centennial was first developed. A lot of these houses, sumps flow directly into these SSDs. As they get clogged, that backs up into basements, and we get some interesting phone calls from property owners. So we have been addressing those needs as we can and as our budget allows over the last several years, and it is identified on our master plan as well. So we're proposing a rate increase. Nobody wants a rate increase, clearly. No one's excited about that. But where do we fall in line relative to our neighbors? So the graph before you is a comparison of the other Hamilton County municipalities that have stormwater utilities. You can see Westfield in green, and we are at the $4.16 mark here in 2022. The graph shows what we are proposing with this ordinance into 2027. Carmel, their ordinance is actually a 3% in perpetuity increase that's built into their ordinance directly. When they started their stormwater utility rate, it was a $5.25 rate initially in 2017, and it is now $6.09 today with that 3% increase. And then Fishers, they did a rate increase in 2019 to $6.66. They have remained $6.66 since then, with no apparent plans to update their rates. However, a lot of communities are seeing similar cost increases that we're seeing, and it wouldn't be surprising if many municipalities went through this rate study as well. So I mentioned there's 95 stormwater utilities in the state. Here's the breakdown of those stormwater utilities. I will provide these slides to council as well, but I can tell you that, again, Westfield at $4.16 on the right, or excuse me, on the left third of this slide, with the average for non-county entities being at $5.92 here in Indiana. You can break that down into regional sections as well. So Central Indiana, the average is $5.16. Again, there's Westfield currently $1 below the average on the left third of that spectrum. So we are proposing to bring our rate back in line with more traditionally the average that we see in the state. That'll help us reflect a more sustainable program with our stormwater utility, and we'll keep some of those expenses off of the general fund. With that said, I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
I'm not sure that I have a question as much as a statement. First of all, thanks for the information, and thanks for sharing this. We went over this a couple weeks ago, so I appreciate that. Appreciate it again. I guess my statement is, I understand if we haven't changed this since 2016, obviously we've changed a considerable amount as a community since then. So I understand the need for a change. When we're comparing it to those around us, we're less than half the size of those communities that we're being compared to. So let's not lose perspective of that. But I think my comment is the same. I think I shared this with you when we went through this the first time. If we need to make that adjustment, I can get behind the concept of making the adjustment. What I can't get behind is putting something in place that says once we reach 2028, each year we're gonna raise another 3%. So basically that's a rate hike every year, and I think you'd stated until the council says otherwise. I think we're viewing that. No offense, I mean it's not. But I think we're viewing that backwards. If we need to make an adjustment somewhere down the road, then come back to us and say, hey, we might need to make another adjustment. But I can tell you, where I stand right now, I cannot imagine a scenario where I would just say a 3% increase on an annual basis.
Understood. For some context, the reason we had the 3% increase in there is really twofold. We certainly hope that that inflation trends back to a more historic rate, which is roughly 3%. So that would help keep us up with inflation trends. Secondly, it does cost money and resources to update this rate as well as update our stormwater master plan. I can tell you that Christopher Burke, doing the update to the stormwater master plan, some process improvements, and the rate study, it's about $100,000 of consulting fees to do this work. And so if the council would like to encumber those expenses every 5 years, that's certainly fine, and that's your prerogative. But the idea was to maybe save some money in consulting fees by just inputting a 3% increase for the time being.
I appreciate the explanation. I don't think it's swayed me, but I appreciate the explanation for sure.
Yep.
I have a few questions. In the ordinance, it makes it sound like only the non-residential ones get that stepped increase over the years. And so I was wondering, is there a reason for that?
So let me.
It says for all non-residential properties, the 5-year graduated ERU shall be implemented for all non-residential properties in the district.
Yeah, that may be a typo in the ordinance. We'll take a look at that and make a revision. That should be both for residential and for commercial.
Okay, it just specifically called out that, so it didn't make sense to me.
I suspect that when we did the rate increase in 2016, we did a graduated rate increase for commercial businesses from $2.16 to $3.16 to $4.16 from 17, 18, and 19. I suspect that might be some carryover language that needs to be adjusted.
Okay. So I saw the list of the capital projects in a way. It didn't outline or show any reference to the $3 million we're putting in ARPA funds, and that should be adjusting down what needed investment we have.
Yeah, so the ARPA project was specifically left out of the expenses for the stormwater utility rate study. And the reason for that is that that Penn and Union Street project that I referenced earlier is separate from the South Union Roosevelt College.
Well, shouldn't that be in all the stormwater capital projects plan in the document, and then we include that?
We identified specifically the capital improvement projects we wanted to accomplish in the next 5 years. If we aren't paying for that ARPA project out of stormwater utility, we didn't include it in that rate study. Does that make sense? Just the things we want to pay for.
It's a stormwater project that otherwise would be using these resources to fund that. But instead, we're contributing our ARPA dollars toward that.
Yeah,
So
that's
I feel
fair.
like it should have counted actually in and then be credited back, just so it's in our stormwater plan, because this makes it seem like this has our plan and not just these revenues from that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I guess the assumption we made was that that project was going to take place, and so therefore we weren't going to include it in expenses in the forthcoming 5 years, because it was not being paid for out of the stormwater fund. It was just with ARPA dollars. I understand your point, Councilor Spoljaric. We can make that adjustment, certainly. It's gonna increase the rate that then we would be, that would come through in the calculation. You're
Well, no,
adding
I
an
would think
additional,
you'd
you're
be
adding
crediting
additional
that
$4
in.
million in expenses, so the rate would then increase to balance out the revenues.
More for public education, to
Okay.
know that, hey, you know, it would have actually needed to be this amount, but
Okay.
because of ARPA, then we're able to actually charge you a little bit less than we would have.
Yeah,
I
to
think is
advertise and
what I'm trying to
educate.
get at.
Yeah, no, I agree, that's a fair point. And we can do more to highlight that ARPA project.
Okay, thank you.
Any other comments, councilors? Jonathan, thank you. Appreciate the information you shared tonight.
Thank you.
And we look forward to seeing you back here on August 22nd for a public hearing. Okay, our next and final item tonight is the form approval for the ARAP nonprofit grants. Councilor Spoljaric is going to explain this new form to us. It's needed for the distribution of the ARPA funds to the various nonprofits.
I'll try and be quick. We've already appropriated this money. We've already approved the actual dollar amounts going to the 7 different entities, the nonprofits. What is needed is a agreement, and we worked with a template from Burns and Thornburg, our consultant with the ARPA project. They provided that template, and I've since had Manny, because Mayor is a signatory on this, gotten it through him, and he made a number of formatting and other changes, including E-Verify. But a few key items that I added in from the template, because they were not added in by Barnes and Thornburg, for all the funds to go out to these entities by October 1st, 2022. Agree to expend the funds by December 31st, 2023. There is a process where they can request in writing a 6-month extension on that spend, but it would have to come to council at a meeting and be voted on. And a written report be sent to the council within 5 business days after all their funds are expended. And then again, the mayor will be signing on behalf of the city. And once we get the form of this approved, which I included one example, which was the youth assistance program, so you could actually see in effect what that boils down to, then we can get the rest of those drafted and executed with signatures. And from there, the clerk treasurer's office will be able to cut checks. Anyone have any questions? And can we get a verbal form of approval on the form of these contracts? Or agreements, I should say.
I don't know, that's the question. Any questions?
I definitely like the additions you added.
You okay with that, Scott?
Can we then just have a voice approval here, a voice? Let's move for an approval of this format. Okay, and would you call the roll?
Do you want me to call individually, or do you want
Why don't
to?
you call individually?
Okay, can do. Scott Willis,
Yes.
Joe Edwards,
Yes.
Cindy Spoljaric,
Yes.
Jake Gilbert,
Yes.
Mike Johns.
Yes.
Scott Fry.
Yes.
Troy Patton.
Yes.
6-0.
Thank you, thank you. That ends the formal part of this evening. Do we have any residents who would like to address the council this evening? We have one.
And push, okay, it bounces on and off. Linda Nass, 1122 East 161st Street, Westfield, Indiana. I want to go back to the, talk a little bit about the Resolution 14-122 and ask you to please consider this. When that was written, it was a city. It was the city who owned it, the Grand Park, and the city was lending the money, and it went from one fund to another. It did not go as an appropriation, but it does state that it was debt and it was going to be paid back, and it does state that it was for development. Now, things changed, because in 2017, the city gave the Grand Park to the RDA, who then leased it to the RDC. So now we're not talking about the same monies per se. I want you to consider this. Maybe I'm just wrong, but I want you to consider that now it's the RDC Grand Park who needs to pay back the city. I'm in agreement, it needs to be paid back, 8 years of money use with no interest. Disclosure, I am an RDC member appointed by the council, but you know, there hasn't been much motivation to pay this. I've heard Cindy talk about it forever. I know we on the RDC have asked about it and say, how are we gonna repay this money? But I want you to consider that maybe there's a different way. When Manny was talking about cleaning up things, maybe we didn't clean this up. When we transferred to the property, the Grand Park, to the RDA, leased it to the RDC, did we forget to talk about the debt that maybe should have been transferred to that other entity, being the RDC? So then, is it possible to pay it out of RDC TIF funds? Because TIF funds per code, are for debt. So this is an example of debt. Maybe it doesn't come out of operational. I see Manny shaking his head, but I'd like to see this answers by code. Does it come out of operation funds, or does it come out of RDC TIF funds, considering that it was for, if you go back and read the document, it was for the development of Grand Park. Didn't say anything about the operations at that time. So we have asked before, where is this owed from exactly? And you know, it's nice of you if you're going to take it back and not charge them interest. You know, interest sometimes motivates people to pay. I'm not sure that's motivational in terms of the city. But there are funds in the TIF accounts that could perhaps pay for this and pay for this sooner. And I think I know you asked Jeremy to help with this. Same concern I had with making him the RDC Executive Director. You want him to talk about paying this back from an RDC Grand Park to a city, and he wears both hats, so I don't know how he does that. It seems difficult as a conflict for him. So just wanted to bring that up as all this was going on and looking for sources of repayment. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, next item, comments from the clerk's office.
There are none.
City council comments. Why don't we start with Cindy Spoljarek? Do you have a report from the APC?
Sure. The APC met August 1st. We had one detailed development plan approval on the consent agenda, the Westfield Health Pavilion at Midtown. The overall development plan and primary plat was approved for the Springwater development, which is on the east side of Union, north of 161st. We forwarded a positive recommendation to the PUD amendment for the Midtown at Westfield. There were 2 public hearings, both for items previously introduced here, the Westfield Yard PUD and the UDO amendment about the landscape bonds. Then we had discussion about the Wood Robinson Briggs PUD amendment, mostly centering around requested changes to the park area and the discrepancy of the desires between the landowner and what's in the PUD. And then we got to hear first from Laura, who's our new planner, so thank you. It was nice. And one of the longest discussions there was the proposed amended rules of procedure for the APC, and there was a lot of dialogue over changes to the ex parte communications portion. There were things added now prohibiting ex parte communications, which drove a lot of the discussion, and that's still being worked out, so there has been no change in the rules yet. That's it.
Thank you. Cindy, any other comments? Finance Committee or?
We had a good meeting, had a good presentation by Site Search, which was informative, and that's about it.
Sure.
Any other comments?
Sure, I've got I guess a question as much as anything. Obviously, we've got a lot of stuff going on with the city. We got a lot of stuff going on, exciting time with potentially the future of Grand Park and what that looks like. I just want to kind of make sure that I have a better understanding. I'm getting lots and lots of questions, and I want to be able to answer those as accurately as possible. I know we've talked about it a little bit as far as the bids, and I know we've got a committee that's going to work on reviewing those. I assume that committee then is going to make a recommendation or make a suggestion. I'm curious, time frame wise, and I don't know how to answer this question currently when I get it. When will that be back in front of council, whatever that recommendation is, to determine what the future, for a vote on what the future is with Grand Park?
I wish we could predict that, but there's just really no way of telling. It's up to the committee to undergo that process and give the same attention that the proposals, that the bidders have given to the proposals. To give further background, I mean, the point of the committee is to do just that, to allow, obviously, Mr. Padden's a council representative and other diverse representatives from the community and business leaders the opportunity to review these proposals as they come and to do it thoroughly and to do it completely and give them the same courtesy. I just want to add, it didn't have to be that way. The mayor chose to implement this committee structure. It could have been done just administratively, and then all of this be done by the administrative staff and then be brought to you for a vote. But he chose to do it under this committee structure where it provides a lot more input and a lot more thorough review, frankly, and ultimately, yes, you're right, there will be every opportunity for this body and the RDC and to ask questions and to evaluate whatever the proposals come through. But there's no way I can give you a timeline, or I'll recommend anybody else to give you a timeline on what that might be.
No, and please understand, I'm not asking for, by next Wednesday at 3 p.m.
Oh, sure.
I'm
sure.
not asking for that, but I mean, are you anticipating maybe
months
a
long
30-day window, a 90-day window?
Months long. Because ultimately, and again, who knows what the proposals are going to end up being and how complex they're going to be, and obviously they can be either a purchase or an operational type of proposal. So even if you outline, even if just a few of the ones that have said they're going to bid, those proposals are going to be robust. You have to evaluate them. You likely, I don't know what the committee's going to do. They likely want to meet with the entities and give them every opportunity to fully vet their proposals and ask questions. And then they come before you, the RDC, and otherwise, and then the process starts, right? Because then there's a huge due diligence period that would be inherent in every sort of process, whether it's a public-private partnership or certainly with a sale. And so months long is kind of the best I can do.
Sure, okay.
And then, go ahead.
Okay. Go ahead.
No, please.
You referenced the RDC, and just for clarity, I mean, is that just for informative purposes, I assume?
I beg your pardon, I didn't catch the last part.
You referenced that it's going to be brought before us and then the RDC as well. I'm just wanting to understand the role there with the RDC.
Yes. So the city owns GPEC, right? Mm-hmm. So to the extent there's anything involving that, it would have to be brought before the city. And to the extent any sort of, let's say it's a purchase or any sort of proposal really that ends up having to take action, which it must, to defease debt in any sort of purchase scenario, that would have to be brought before the city. The RDC, as the master leaseholder in the RDA, will also be involved in the process, obviously.
All right. Thank you.
Any other comments, councilors? Okay. My comments for tonight is, again, first of all, thank everybody who stayed and bore with us tonight. And I'd also like to compliment the council on some really good discussions, some thoughtful conversations tonight. We're doing our best to try to work on policies and procedures as we move forward in the city. And we're looking at a lot of different concerns and items that have been around for a while, some old, some new. And I think I'm proud of the way the conversations went tonight, and I think we're making progress. So thank you, everybody. Mr. Mayor? Okay, that's it then. We're going to close this evening. Thank you all.